मुशर्रफ की एडमिशन निले मुशर्रफ শুনতে পাচ্ছো এমফিল এডমিশন নিলে
Hi everyone.
Welcome, Dr.
हेलो
Gauri.
वेलकम गुड इवनिंग
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
Welcome, Priyanka Radhi. Priyanka Radhi join করেছে।
यस यस प्रियंका दी প্রিয়ঙ্কা দির আইডি পিএস ফিল ইউনিভার্সিটি অফ ক্যালকাটা এই নামে আছে আইডি আছে
So where is Professor Priyamada? What is her ID?
Yes, her ID is PS Field University of Calcutta. Right,
Okay.
Priyambada Di? Professor Priyambada Sarkar's ID is PS Field University of Calcutta. Good evening, Priyambada Di.
Here now. Here.
Yesterday it was Priyambada Sarkar, the name itself. Today,
Yes, I was slightly confused. I can see that name. So.
Inakhiri will also join today. I have sent the link to Professor Sharak also. Don't know whether she will join or not. Anirban Mukherjee still hasn't joined, I think.
Welcome.
Yes, well, welcome Professor Sharak.
Professor Sharak.
Just I was uttering. Welcome.
Hi there. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you. Did you stay on much longer last night?
Yeah.
Not very long after you left.
Okay. It was very intense. Let's say just 3 hours in a row with no
Yes,
break.
It was 4 hours. 4 hours. More than 4
Long
hours.
session.
It was very intense indeed. So I think Professor Sarkar will present. Yes.
Welcome, Korobi.
হ্যাঁ ঠিক আছে
Robesta, how is the situation in Mumbai now? The COVID situation and power cut.
Situation is not very good. Things are not very good. But so far, okay, we are managing.
And there was a power cut, some power cut problem we saw in the
That
media.
was day before yesterday. We didn't have power for almost about 8 hours.
Okay.
Some massive power grid failure. But now electricity is restored, not a problem. But the COVID cases are not decreasing.
Yes.
So even inside the campus, we have an average of 4 cases a day right now.
Oh,
That's a lot.
that's somehow worrying.
Yeah, it's quite scary. But I think now we have stopped being scared. So
Yes,
I think
somehow
that-
life has to move on in
yes,
some
yes.
way or another. What can we
Yeah.
do?
So you're not only teaching online, you're also teaching on
No.
campus then?
We have all the teaching is happening online, but we do have postdoctoral fellows as well as PhD students who are in their last leg. So they have been invited back.
Right.
We have about 200 more students who are from the rural parts of India who would not have access to net. So they have been.
I see.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
That's very difficult, yeah. Oh.
Welcome, Didi.
Indeterminacy, welcome. So Professor Priyambada Sarkar is ready. Priyambada Di?
হ্যাঁ আচ্ছা আমি পাওয়ার পয়েন্ট I'm trying to show it in PowerPoint. Can you see it?
Yes,
Yes, we can
you can see very clearly.
Very clearly.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
It is perhaps in MS Word. Oh no, Microsoft PowerPoint. Yes, but very clearly we can see. No problem.
Okay then. Yes, I'm ready.
Yes. So I request Professor Jhareshwar Ghosh to please start the proceedings. Jhareshwar, yes.
Good evening. Namaskar. Today is the second and final day of the international webinar on determinacy and indeterminacy in meaning from Wittgenstein's perspective. On behalf of the Department of Philosophy, University of Gour, Banga, I am Jhareshwar Ghosh, expressing my hearty and warm welcome to the eminent research persons, faculty members from my department and other departments, teachers from different universities and colleges, distinguished participants, students, research scholars, for being here in the second and final day of the international webinar. Yesterday, we learned many insightful and thought-provoking philosophical dimension of Wittgenstein from Professor Daniel Moyle Sharrock, Professor Indrani Sanal, Dr. Inakshi Roy Mitra. We are very much fortunate enough today with us very eminent Wittgensteinian scholar, Professor Priyambada Sarkar, University of Calcutta, Dr. Anirban Mukherjee, University of North Bengal, and Dr. Parvesh Jang Bole, IIT Bombay, Mumbai. So without any delay, we are entering the second academic session. In this session, I just invite Professor Priyambada Sarkar, Professor of Philosophy, University of Calcutta. He is an eminent Wittgensteinian scholar, completed PhD from King's College, London, United Kingdom, founder president of the Ludwig Wittgenstein Philosophical Society, India, and a life member of the British Wittgenstein Society, United Kingdom. Professor Priyambada Sarkar is best known for her critical and analytic writings. He has committed her academic career to teaching and research mostly in the areas of analytic philosophy, epistemology, applied ethics, and comparative religion. He has authored many books like Wittgenstein and Solipsism, Uttara Parver Wittgenstein, Philosophical Investigation in Bengali, and Tatporjo o Bachyo Fregeর ভাষাদর্শনের ভূমিকা. Apart from this, she has edited 6 anthologies jointly with others, scholarly published many articles in the reputed journals and anthology. Her forthcoming manuscript entitled Language, Limits and Beyond, Early Wittgenstein and Rabindranath Tagore. We are eagerly waiting, Madam. It's scheduled to be published from Oxford University Press, maybe December 2020. Today, we are eagerly waiting for her expert philosophical views on the meaning of life through the lens of early Wittgenstein. Till time, our student and research scholar to give your full attention to Professor Priyambada Sarkar. With these few words, without any delay, I invite Priyambada Di to deliver her talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Jandeshwar. Only thing, as I'm a novice in doing this PowerPoint presentation online, so please comment if you cannot see or if you cannot hear. Now, am I audible to you all?
Yeah. Yes. But
Sorry,
in your
I'm not getting the full PowerPoint. I'm not getting the full PowerPoint screen. I'm getting half of it only.
It's
partially.
Yeah, it's just partial, and then the other is
partial. Okay. Okay. Priyambada Di, just minimize the zoom.
Okay. Minimize what?
Zoom.
Now,
okay, I'll figure it out.
Yes.
There you go. That's very good.
Yeah.
Thank you
Now
so
we
much.
can see it.
Yes.
Yeah, just slightly increase.
Slightly increase it up to 100 probably.
Yeah.
I think you should remove the list on the left.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
could-
Okay,
you
Yes,
could-
okay,
yes. It will help.
okay, okay. Fine. Yeah.
Is it all
Very
right?
good.
Is it all
Very
right?
good. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to express my sincere thanks and gratitude to the organizers that they have given me this opportunity to share my thoughts with the learned speakers and august participants in this international webinar. Now, the theme of the webinar, as you all know, is determinacy and indeterminacy in meaning from Wittgenstein's perspective. And the question is determinacy and indeterminacy in meaning of what? Meaning of a sentence, of a proposition, of an action, or of life and the world. I chose the last option as the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic has compelled us to look at life and world in a completely different way. It has undoubtedly changed our form of life, our cultural form of life and being. Now, being a COVID survivor myself, I couldn't help reflecting on these fundamental questions. What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? How do we realize the meaning and purpose of life? Or do we realize it at all? Now, in this paper, I'd like to concentrate on the questions through the lens of early Wittgenstein. The reason seems to be this: as philosophers, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Okay. The reason seems to be this: as philosophers, we are not frontliners in the management of this worldwide crisis throughout the world. What we can at best do is to reflect on the situation. Let us have a quick look at the reflection of the philosophers worldwide. First, I'd like to refer to Italian philosopher George Agamben, who thinks that, quote, the greatest danger we face is not the virus, but dehumanization and the possible loss of our free society, unquote. He apprehends that limiting all our communications and activities to digital platform might ultimately pave the way for higher automatons, and his hunches got confirmed in our Nobel laureate economist Esther Duflo's apprehension that the companies in new normal situation might feel eager to hire automatons as they don't fall sick or face the risk of infection. On the other hand, find Venturinha and Zizek, who feel that distrust towards the authorities, towards the state, and also distrust from the authorities towards its people will not lead us anywhere. To fight this epidemic, quote, I'm quoting from Zizek, we need extra trust, an extra sense of solidarity, an extra sense of goodwill, all of which have been completely used up, unquote. So the problem for us is trust or no trust. I'd like to, for the answer of this question, I'd like to focus on a philosopher who was a frontliner, not in a warlike situation, but in actual war, the First World War. In the first section of the paper, I'd like to focus on notebooks, 1914-16, Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, a lecture on ethics, and reports from diaries written during the period, during the war period, by Maginnis's book, Young Ludwig. These are the primary materials which which captures the essence of his early thinking. Now, in notebooks, he had never referred to anything but the logic of language, meaning of sentences or propositions before uh, before 11th June 1960. On that day, we find him first referring to the meaning of life and work. He writes, the slide is there, you can see that there he says, the meaning of life is problematic. The meaning of life is the meaning of the world, and this meaning lies outside the world. Now, the meaning is connected with goodwill, which cannot bring about changes in the happenings of the world, but the willing subject can become independent by renouncing its amenities. And the third important point is that one can designate the meaning of life and world as God. Now, what I'm going to propose in this paper is that these remarks, though seem to be unconnected to each other, though seem to be apparently disparate, but they're not actually so. Here, Wittgenstein points towards the importance of acquiring a peculiar perspective, which would, in effect, transform one's life from being meaningless to being meaningful, from being unhappy to happy. And it will help us that the proper interpretation of these passages will help us to solve the riddle concerning the will being powerless to affect the world on the one hand and changing the limits of the world on the other. In this venture, I'd appeal also to the ideas of the play The King of the Dark Chamber, which Wittgenstein admired greatly and even translated some portions of the play along with Smileys, which got published in 2017, for an illustration of the this is a work in progress project entitled The Meaning of Life from the Metaphysical to the Ordinary. Now, today I'll present the first half of it, and his early views. And I have kept it, the second section, if I have enough time, then I intend to look at Wittgenstein's departure from his earlier views about the meaning of life and ethical contemplative willing. The main idea is that Wittgenstein's views in this regard underwent a change, along with a change in his methodology. I'd like to bring in aspect seeing in PI and Sattel, where he talks about a change of aspects in viewing particular objects of the world, which is seeing and not seeing at the same time. In PI, one notices that for later Wittgenstein, aspect perception depends on being in possession of certain skills and capacities, not on being ethically contemplative and adopting a view from eternity. However, I'm not being ambitious. I don't think I'll be able to go there. Anyway, now my interpretation of the Tractatus in this endeavor is not resolute. As I feel, resolute interpreters have not given due importance to what the author himself had suggested in his letters to Barton Russell and Ludwig von Sickert. Wittgenstein candidly expressed himself by saying, the main thrust of the book is to distinguish between what can be said and what cannot be. Again, at the same time, he passionately believed that, quote, what we cannot talk about is most important, unquote. Wittgenstein remarks on the mystical, the contrast between saying and showing, and the inexpressible also raise questions for the resolute interpreters. For me, the non-resolute reading of the Tractatus seems to be more pertinent, as the publication of private notebooks and diaries speak in favor of the view that wartime experience had a toll on the body and mind of young Ludwig. It prompted him to stress on the inexpressibility of deep questions on life and death, values and God in scientific terms. Now, I'll come to the main focus of the section. Let us begin with the oneness of meaning of life and meaning of world. Wittgenstein says the world and life are one. Physiological life is of course not life, and neither is psychological life. So what exactly does he mean by this? Apparently, physical and mental facts constitute our physiological and psychological life. But Wittgenstein is not ready to accept them as life with capital L. I have not done it in the PowerPoint, but in the book, whenever he is saying that the world and life are one, he uses the W and L in capital. It is obvious the world with capital W is not the world as totality of facts. As we all are aware that according to the Tractatus, a proposition is sensible if it pictures a particular state of affairs, if it describes a particular fact or event of the world. And the propositions which do not depict any fact or event of the world are not sensible. Now, there are kinds of non-sensible, so I'm not going into that now. As physiological life and psychological life are constituted of physical and mental facts that belong to the world as a totality of facts, but here life in capital L transcends the factual world. That is why it lies outside the world as a totality of facts. Now, let us move to the second theme. It is connected with goodwill, like the meaning of life is connected with goodwill, which cannot bring about changes in the happenings of the world. Now, goodwill, ethics is concerned with goodwill, ethics is concerned with good and evil, and in a lecture on ethics, we find that he connects ethics with the meaning of life. When he attempts to define ethics by giving a number of synonymous expressions like ethics is the inquiry into meaning of life or into what makes life worth living. Now he elucidates the relation between the meaning of life and ethics in the following remark, that this is here, if good and evil willing affects the world, it can only affect the limits of the world. On the other hand, he's saying that it cannot affect any facts of the world, but he's saying that it can affect the limits of the world. And this affecting and altering the limits of the world is very important because it transforms one's life. Now, two important points follow from this quotation. Good and evil willing changes the limits of the world, and by such alteration makes the world meaningful or meaningless. And the second important point is that it cannot be stated in ordinary language. Now the question is, how can goodwill bring about changes in the limits of the world? Isn't he being inconsistent? Like, as I mentioned earlier, that it cannot affect on the one hand the world, and on the other hand it can alter the limits. For him, good life is happy life, and harmony is the criterion of happy life, and it is the only right life. He says, he clearly remarks it in the notebook. And this situation, now the question is, how can you secure such good and happy life, which is not only happy, this is good, and this is harmonious. He uses it all together. Now, Wittgenstein gives a clue to one in one of his remarks. He said, "How can man be happy at all, since he cannot ward off the misery of this world through the life of knowledge? The life of knowledge is the life that is happy in spite of the misery of the world. The only life that is happy is the life that can renounce the amenities of the world. To it, amenities of the world are basis of faith." Now, here he is saying that it is through the attitude of renunciation that one can change the unhappy world into a happy one. If one could acquire this attitude, then worldly state of affairs, like not fulfilling one's desires, like not facing uncomfortable situations, etc., will not ultimately affect him. In that way, he can become independent of the state of affairs of the world, and in consequence, he doesn't get affected by the worldly affairs. And how can one acquire this quality? Now, Wittgenstein biographers tell us how Wittgenstein himself lived such happy life by renouncing the amenities of the world. Like, he didn't take his inherited properties, and he used to he live a life of almost like a sannyasi. So he had acquired this attitude of renunciation towards the world so that he can lead a happy life. Now, how can one acquire this quality? For him, one can really practice the act of renunciation only when one adopts a particular perspective. And the perspective consists in viewing the world sub specie aeterni. Now, according to Wittgenstein, viewing the world sub specie aeterni, which means viewing from eternity, for him it is to view the world as a limited whole. Like in Tractatus, paragraph 6.45, is saying that viewing the world as a limited whole, this is also mystical, this attitude. Now, he clarifies a bit about what he means by viewing from eternity in culture and value. He said that it is as though thought flies above the world and lifts it as it is, observing it from above in flight. Explaining viewing such specific sub-specie aeterni in terms of viewing from above in flight might remind us that Ludwig was an aeronautical engineer at the beginning of his career. And it provides us also with an insight that such viewing leaves everything in the world as it is. It cannot bring about any change in the facts or events of the world. And when one sees from above, everything seems to be on the same level. Now, what happens when one views an object from eternity? When one views an object from above, that object becomes the whole world. Wittgenstein elucidates the thing seen, sub specie eternitatis, is the same thing seen together with the whole logical space. Yesterday we were discussing logical space, the world of possibilities, and logical space in the Tractatus indicates the domain of possibilities of those which are actual. They constitute the world. Now, he elaborates it. What is looking at things from eternity? What is viewing the world from eternity? Now, the usual way of looking at things is objects from the midst of them. The view sub specie eternitatis is from outside, in such a way that they have the whole world as a background. And then he elucidates this, that how can we conceive of such way of looking at things which makes the object the whole world? He elucidates. He gives an example of a stove, and he says, if I have been contemplating the stove and then I'm told But now all you know is the stove. My result does indeed seem trivial. For this represents the matter as if I had studied the stove as one among the many things in the world, but if I was contemplating the stove, it was my world, and everything else colorless by contrast with it. That is, when I view the stove ethically or aesthetically, from eternity, it becomes the whole world. If one views the world ethically, then also it waxes and wanes as a whole and becomes a completely different world. Thus, viewing from eternity enables one to see and know that each one of us belongs to the world as a whole, where everybody is on the same level. Moreover, he's pointing out that viewing from eternity or viewing aesthetically or ethically is actually contemplation. Since contemplation makes its object the whole world for me, there is no distinction between ethics and aesthetics. As in art and in good life, an object can become the whole world. And now we can remember that in ethics, in Tractatus, he says that ethics and aesthetics are one and the same. Now, this is common in traditional accounts of aesthetic contemplation, where it is typically one in which the whole of consciousness is inhabited by the object contemplated. Now, by such aesthetical and ethical contemplative thinking, one can change one's attitude to the world. One can transform one's unhappy world to a happy one. Then Wittgenstein asks, what is the objective mark of the happy and harmonious life? And he admits that it's again clear that there cannot be any such mark, that there cannot be any such objective mark that can be described. This mark cannot be a physical one, but only a metaphysical one, a transcendental one. But after a month, in another entry, he says, in order to live happily, I must be in agreement with the world. And that is what being happy means. And then, so to speak, in agreement with that alien will on which I appear dependent. That is to say, I'm doing the will of God. And then again he says that this may be, at any rate, we are in a certain sense dependent, and what we are dependent on we can call God. In the sense, God would simply be fate. Now we feel confused because what type of God is this which can be identified with faith, and how are we dependent on it? For Wittgenstein, the recipe for living happily is to accept the world and whatever ills and misfortunes it may throw at us, not to rage against our sufferings and our pains, but to acquiesce in them. Wittgenstein's Stoicism, one might call it his Stoicism, it recommends both the acceptance of pointless suffering and, crucially, the happy acceptance of death. Fear in the face of death is the best sign of a false, that is, bad life. Hence, if suffering, frustration, and ultimately death can be accepted by us, we will be living in agreement with the world and with fate. We will, in other words, be doing the will of God. And this is something that cannot be portrayed by factual language, as it is not concerned with fact, but can only be shown. At least this is clear now, that this notion of God, which Wittgenstein equates with the meaning various kinds of arguments for the existence of God have occupied an important place in the literature of metaphysics and theology. That is, they make substantial trans-empirical, transcendental truth claims for the factual propositions constituting the argument. Wittgenstein here is arguing against such long-standing tradition of confusing this domain of facts with the domain of the what can be thought with what cannot be thought, what can be said with what cannot be said. For the author of the Tractatus, truth is of two kinds, either necessary logical truth, which are senseless, devoid of factual content, and factual truth, which are sensible but contingent. He thus left no place, no room for metaphysical or theological or religious truth. Now, once in conversation with Drury, Wittgenstein stated clearly, it is a dogma of the Roman Church that the existence of God can be proved by natural reason. Now, this dogma should make it impossible for me to be a Roman Catholic. This is why God of the Tractatus, though not in the world, is also not outside oneself. Rather, God is personally related to oneself, and that is, He has a place in one's heart. The importance of the concept of God stems not from its theological significance, but rather from its relation to a particular way of living in the world. Wittgenstein was against orthodox rituality. He says, Christianity does not mean saying a lot of prayers, rather taking an attitude towards life. He says, this is from conversation with Julie. If you and I are to live religious life, it mustn't be that we talk a lot about religion, but that our manner of life is different. That means ethical upbringing is needed. It's my belief that only if we try to be helpful to other people, that will help you in the end find your way to God. Hence for Ludwig, it is ethical action, not belonging to any creed, that matters in religious life. To maintain a religious life does not even require churches to fall back on. Engelmann, in his memoir, highlighted Wittgenstein's thoughts on the possibility of a new spiritual attitude. This is something like while during war, he visited Olmutz. He stayed there for some time. There, he became friendly with a group of people who used to who wanted to develop a kind of interpretation of New Testament to develop Christians. Now, there, Engelmann in his memoir highlighted Wittgenstein's thoughts on the possibility of a new spiritual attitude. An attitude summed up by the term wordless faith. He states, in this faith of the future, there will be no verbal doctrines, but these become the source of misconstructions. Intimations of the divine rather than talk of the divine will be the heart of wordless faith in the future. Ideals will not be communicated by attempts to describe them, which inevitably distort, but by the models of an appropriate conduct in life. So this ethical is very important. Now, commentators are often puzzled regarding the interpretation of such ethical religion, advocating renunciation and wordless faith at the same time. Cyril Barrett is of the opinion that it has to be admitted that Wittgenstein is pretty isolated in his view. he is not in line with hedonists or utilitarians or emotivists or even with ethical relativists. Now, it is a fact Barrett characterizes his position in this way. It is a fact that his views do not fit in with conventional ethical discourses, conventional ethical theories. But one cannot fail to notice a beautiful illustration of such ethical views in Wittgenstein's favorite allegorical play entitled The King of the Dark Chamber by Rabindranath Tagore. As we all know that he was fond of this play, and along with Maidi's, he translated the play into English. And his translation, as you know, had been... Can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, we can hear.
Absolutely.
But can you see?
Yes, we can.
Can you see? But something came.
Somebody
No, you will have to again share the screen.
No, it is shared. It is shared. It is absolutely shared.
Visible. The slide number 14 is visible.
Okay.
But she is not visible to me.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm not. I might not be visible.
We can see.
Now you can see me.
Yes.
I think so. So I was saying that I'll give an illustration from the. Can I do anything?
I cannot see the PowerPoint screen. I can see it only one fragment. I can see in a very small space.
No, just
Here it is.
This Sushmita Gupta is presenting all the time. This is coming. I think we should ask Sushmita to do something about
this Sushmita Gupta? I don't know.
I don't understand. What is this?
Sushmita Gupta, please.
Just a
Sushmita
minute.
Gupta, please stop
Who
presenting.
is Sushmita Gupta?
Niranjan Mandal, Sushmita Gupta, why are you presenting the screen? Niranjan and Sushmita, stop presenting. It is creating disturbance. Sushmita and Niranjan.
one of the simple solution is just pin her as your main screen. Then it does not matter who will present. Her screen will not disappear.
Yes.
Just pin the screen.
Jyotsnadi, you can pin the screen there from your angle.
The notice is you are no longer presenting.
No, you are presenting.
So someone is presenting.
No, we can see it. We can see it. Please go ahead.
I can also see it very clearly.
So, shall I continue?
Yes.
Enaki, you may continue.
I can only see a fragment of it. I can see the PowerPoint in a very small fragment. Previously, it kind of pervaded the whole screen, but it's now in small space. Can somebody do something with this? Can somebody suggest what to do to enlarge the one is to enlarge the PowerPoint screen? You have to enlarge the PowerPoint screen. How to do that?
There is one signal like resume your presentation. Shall I click it? Because I'm doing it.
Jyotsnadi, from the admin page, if you can see.
Sushmita Gupta is presenting. Some Sushmita Gupta is presenting.
I have sent a message also to Sushmita.
Yes. And if you can pin the screen, Jyotsnadi, the PowerPoint screen, if you can pin the screen. For example, I have pinned the screen. I can see it.
In any case, I'll not present any.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll read it. Now we were talking about. We were discussing. Now you can hear me.
Yes, you are audible.
Yes.
Now I come to the play, The King of the Dark Chamber, for the illustration of this ethical view. Now the play revolves around the mysterious invisible king, who, as we learn from his subjects, is benevolent and efficient, although they haven't ever seen him, nor even his wife. Huh? Not even his wife. So they have doubts regarding his nature, his beauty, and even about his existence. Like they often doubt whether the king exists or not. His reticence towards being seen causes most of the drama centering around his queen Sudarshana. The play focuses on the transformation of Queen Sudarshana, who at the beginning of the play was proud of her intelligence, of her beauty, of her love for the king, and the king's love for her. Because of this, she was confident that she will be able to recognize the king in broad daylight during spring festival, although he hasn't seen him beforehand. But she failed. A huge catastrophe occurred due to her failure. She had to go through utter despair, pain, and humiliation, and then finally her king showed himself only after she had cast away her pride and prejudices against ugliness and come out on the road as a maid of the king. This complete surrender allows her to see the king, to realize him in everything. At the concluding scene of the play, when the queen is ready to receive the king, as he is actually is in himself, he joins her in her dealings with the world. Certainly, the queen's world waxes and wanes as a whole. The Tractatus 6.43, with changes of her inner world incorporated. The king, we must note, does not impose himself on the queen. He does not come to rescue her when the palace is set on fire by a king from another country. The king does not abandon her either. Instead, he waits for her to find the way to live existentially, herself usurping in the moment his presence would be truly relevant. It's her feelings which changed and nothing else changed. That changed the boundary of the world, making an unhappy world into a happy one. But that did not alter the arrangements of the totality of facts which constitute the world. This notion of transformation of the world is very important in the play and very important in the philosophy of early Wittgenstein, because Wittgenstein also intends its reader's world to be transformed once he understands the book rightly. It helps us to understand the most oracular paragraph at the end of the book. As you all know, I'm not using PowerPoint or anything. My propositions serve as elucidations in the following way. Anyone who understands me eventually recognizes them as nonsensical when he has used them as steps to climb up beyond them. The implication is when the reader uses the book as a ladder and sees the world rightly, and then he is in no need of the ladder as his world is transformed. But what exactly is this seeing the world right, which transforms one's world? What kind of seeing can change one's life and world completely? We find a clue to answer this question in notebooks 1914-16. On 1st August 1916, Wittgenstein says, "How things stand is God, and God is how things stand." Now here, it does not need to be taken as going against the Tractatus, which holds that anything higher which includes ethics, aesthetics, religion, metaphysics, etc., must lie outside the world. One might apprehend some inconsistency here, as he speaks on the same breath that God is beyond the domain of facts. God does not reveal himself in the world. And then again, in a pantheistic overtone, equates God with how things stand. Here one can suggest that in the Tractatus, one has to go beyond the world to look for the value. However, once one has reached this stage, viewing from eternity, when one reaches this mystical state, having gone beyond, then looking back at the world is never the same again. With the mystic transformation taken shape in the subject, the facts, that is how things stand, have got a touch of value on them. Now, on this interpretation, the world that the person sees right when he has climbed up all the stairs is the pantheistic world on the one hand and solipsistic on the other. How things stand is God on the one hand and I am my world on the other. The equation goes like this: I am my world, the world as it stands is God, and there are three Godheads, me, my world, and God. In the Tractatus, Wittgenstein wanted to draw a limit to thought, which he couldn't do. Instead, he drew a boundary on the limits of language, which will somehow be coextensive with the boundaries of sensible thought. Once you draw the boundary, you are somehow apprised of what lies there outside the boundary. The Tractatus shows what lies on the other side of the boundary. What lies on the other side of the boundary are the domain of values, which include ethical, aesthetic, and religious values. Thus, the limits of logic and language are determined by the totality of possible state of affairs, the totality of elementary propositions. What transcends these limits are the mystical union of three Godheads, me, my world, and God. One cannot say this. An attempt to say this will be nonsensical. Yet, it is not insignificant. In fact, this is most important, as one who has this experience can view the world, who has this experience by viewing the world from eternity, can view the world pantheistically. So far, I have not referred to any diary entries during this time. Brian McGuinness tells us that during this period of his life, Wittgenstein considered the philosophical solution as the solution to the problems of life. He asked, how can I be a good philosopher when I cannot manage to be a good man? He treats philosophy as if it were a war. Only victory will do. Only a definitive solution which will enable us to set the problem aside. This is said in the preface of the Tractatus, and in our discussion, we see it reflected even in his discussion of the meaning of life as adopted. Developing an ethical attitude of renunciation towards the world could enrich a life with meaning. And here, this meaning of life, regarding this meaning of life, he was determinate, no doubt about that. Now, coming back to our original query, trust or no trust? What can be the advice from the frontliner? Now, here I'll quote from his advice to Drury, quote, don't think about yourself, but think about others, unquote. So please wear masks and stay safe and happy at home. Thank you. "40 minutes.
Thank you, Professor Priyambada Sarkar, for the very illuminating talk you have given, and it is related on life, on meaning of life, and the world where we live as I and the world as a whole. Two uses of the word you had told at the beginning part, and how Wittgenstein was influenced by the King of the Dark Chamber of Rabindranath Tagore, and what is the meaning of leading a religious life, and many other aspects. We invite questions, comments, and observations from others, please.
I have a question. Can I ask, please?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Priyambara-ji, thanks for your fascinating talk, actually. I was recording the thing. But just a clarification, a small clarification. You see, in order to understand any atomic fact or a collection of atomic facts, for example, like a stove, Wittgenstein says that also you have to see it in logical space. That is to say, you have to understand the stove as a particular combination of objects, and also with the other options, with the range of the possible combination, the non-actual combination which it shows out. Right. So in that case, you see, we cannot but, to understand the stove, we cannot but understand that how this shapes up as an atomic fact. In order to shape up as an atomic fact, it also shows out the other possible non-actual combination of objects. My question is very simple. How is this different from seeing the stove as the whole, or as the whole space and time, or subspeaking eternity? But not in space and time, but the whole space and time. Yeah, that was not I was very clear about.
Okay. One thing that if we consider a stove as one object among other objects, that is, as it is constituted of objects and etc., that is normal perception. That is what is within the world. When you look at the stove as an object among other objects, but this seeing is completely different when you view it from eternity, and say from aesthetical point of view. How is it becomes completely different. Completely different in the sense it becomes the whole world. Suppose in a play, when you watch a play, the characters, whatever they are playing human emotions, which we ordinarily have our experience in everyday life, like a love triangle or jealousy of the husband, etc. These are all facts, ordinary facts. You can see it as one fact among other facts. But when you see it in the play, when it becomes an aesthetical object, you get absorbed with the play, and the dimension becomes much bigger. It is difficult to express and difficult to state it in words, because that is why he says that these are not something which we can express in sensible language. That is why these are attempts to express the inexpressible. These are unsinnig. You cannot really express it in clear, sensible terms, as they are not the objects among other objects. But you can somehow get to this, like what exactly he meant by ethical viewing or aesthetical viewing. Like, if you permit me, I'll quote a song in Bengali. If the গানের ভিতর দিয়ে যখন দেখি ভুবন খানি, like when I can see the world through a song and I become identified with the world. So that is the aesthetical viewing is different from our ordinary viewing. I don't know whether I'm clear enough, because it's difficult to be clear enough, because it's trying to express something which is inexpressible, insensible language.
Yes, Professor
Thank you,
Sharok.
Priyanka, but I would just,
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Okay, okay, Nakshidi, please, Nakshidi, carry on.
oh, sorry. I want to kind of pester you harder, but Priyanka, I would just like to say something which you can, we can converse on that later on. But what I was worried about is there is definitely an agenda in the Tractatus to deflate all points of view or all attitudes or all beliefs. Because what he wants to, there is an attitude in, there is an agenda in the Tractatus that all questions, all propositions of, or all propositions of, yeah. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Before I couldn't hear you. Now is that?
Am I audible now?
Now, yes.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. What I wanted to say is that Wittgenstein definitely had an agenda in the Tractatus to deflate all beliefs, all attitudes, all viewpoints to atomic facts. What he would say that, okay, this person is looking at the stove from an aesthetic point of view means that, is to open it up in a range of atomic facts having more objects, where that viewer would be one object as a relatum. So I definitely see that is one agenda in the Tractatus, and how to run it together with this other agenda, that there is something like subspecies equality, there is something like seeing it from an aesthetic point of view, but the point of view will cover something as away from the world, which does not let itself be laid out or articulated as a concatenation of objects. That is my body.
Simply to put it briefly, in fact, this is a reason of the Tractatus, that on the one hand, there is this logical part where you have all these atomic fact, elementary propositions and objects and names and how they are constituted by truth-functional theory of meaning, etc. And on the other hand, in the last few pages are these mysticals, like the inexpressibles, which do not fit in with the category of the sensible, do not fit in. In fact, he was writing in his diary that it must be connected. It must be connected, but I can't find the way. Then after some time he writes that these two worlds are connected by the principle of showing. Like, you cannot state it, but it shows. It shows. So it was these two worlds. They are connected by this principle of showing and by feeling. Like feeling the world as a limited whole. If you have got this feeling, like regarding God, he said, no argumentation, no metaphysical, no theological arguments he accepts. So it's only feeling. Now, feeling the world as a limited whole will help you to rise above the mundane and to look at the world from this point of view. So actually, finally, what I think is that the world of facts and the world of values, they are not totally separate. They are not separated into two watertight compartments. In fact, they are intertwined. Like facts manifest the values, and values are manifested by the facts. So in both side communication is there. That's what I think.
Sorry, can I?
Yes,
I would like to add something. Yes, I would like to.
Professor Sharak is.
Yes, if Professor Sharak starts now, then Indeterminacy. After Professor Sharak asks the question, then Professor Sandal can. Yes, Professor Sharak, please.
Yes, can you hear me? Because I hear a lot of voices. Just
we can hear you clearly. We can hear you. Please, we can hear you. Please go on.
so. Can I?
Yes, sure.
Yes,
please,
I can
please
hear
go on.
you.
We can hear you clearly. Professor Sharak, please.
I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Should I ask something or?
Yes, of course. No, you can ask.
Okay,
You
so
can ask.
I somebody else is talking. I don't know if I can talk.
No, you can ask. You can ask right now.
No, you can talk.
You can ask right now. No problem.
Yes, but I'm hearing somebody speaking in the background as though they're not finished. I keep hearing all kinds of voices. Do you hear that? Do you not hear that voice? Somebody's talking.
Indeterminacy, could you please
No, I can hear
mute
your voice.
the microphone? Indeterminacy.
Okay, so let me try.
Yes.
Let me try then. Professor Shagar, I very much appreciated your talk, and I think from what I've heard of it, I think I completely agree with what you're saying. Somebody else is talking. Somebody else is talking. I just don't know at the same time.
We can hear you. The sounds are mute.
Just a minute. I think somebody. Just 1 minute. Okay, I get that now. I had something else was in the background. Okay, now I can. I'm just wondering if you would accept this reading. I think that my reading exactly coincides with yours, but I wasn't sure exactly. From having all of this confusion, and I couldn't hear very well. So, would you accept the following, that for Wittgenstein, the significance of ethics lies in the artist's ability to present objects not as they exist in the empirical world, not so that you see in ordinary life, but sub specie aeternitatis, which means literally from the point of view of eternity. And that means seeing the object atemporally, non-contingently, from outside the world. So this can mean something as, metaphysically loaded as seeing the object from God's eye view, or more simply, seeing the object with detachment. So the usual way of looking at objects, these objects he writes from the midst of them. Them from outside with aesthetic wonder, he said. So this means that the artist views them with the kind of detachment that does not contemplate the fact of existence. So he writes aesthetically is that there is what there is. So of course what the artist sees is not factually any different from the world that we see, but it's her attitude to and her perspective of that world that are different and, as you say, transformative. So for Wittgenstein, as you well started your paper, there's a kind of gestalt switch that takes place in artistic contemplation. The kind of aspect switch, where we, ordinary people, usually see the bare present image as a worthless momentary picture in the whole temporal world, he writes. The artist, in aesthetic wonder, sees it as the true world among shadows. This is his words from the notebook. So the same bare present world, nothing has been added or removed from it, and yet an altogether different world where the contingent and the temporal fade out to allow the atemporal significance to emerge, the eternitatis kind of significance. He writes in Culture and Value, only an artist can represent an individual thing as to make it appear to us like a work of art, A work of art forces us to see it in the right perspective. But in the absence of art, the object is just a fragment of nature like any other. Is that more? I think we completely agree on that. Did I get you? Did I not get you right in something? Do you not agree with something here?
No, I agree with this because for time constraint, I did not bring in this very important example. I wonder that the world exists.
Yes.
Because I wonder that the world exists. It is important because it is, on the one hand, it's an example of absolute value judgment, and at the same time, it's an absolute aesthetical judgment. Now, one proposition or judgment, it becomes the example of both ethical and aesthetical. And I agree, I completely agree with you that it's the attitude. The world remains the same. It's the attitude, the way of viewing the world that makes it different.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate your paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Professor Indrani Sandal wants to ask something. Indrani, please. You can ask. Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Priyambada, for presenting such a nice paper. I very much appreciate your presentation. And the only one thing I would like to add, even when he's writing tractatus, if we look into the very concept of object, though it is actually the end, we reach object at the names, that is at the end point of analysis, but we will see that this object actually is the storehouse of everything, because object contains the possibility of combining. So object indirectly includes another object within its fold. If an object is there, and if it is always inherent with its possibility to combine, so that possibility must be in the object, and so the other object is also linked with it. And also all possibilities, whether it is actual or possible, are all seated in the object. So always I find that, in a sense, if we look very deeply into his Praterian object, I think very much sound is coming. Actually, object includes everything that is in the world, factual. That is also a very mystical way of looking at the object, I think. I don't know whether you will agree or not, because often Wittgenstein is said to be an atomistic, but actually he is a holist. I always interpret Wittgenstein as a holist. He is always looking for a kind of, typically, Purnata, completeness. That is his objective. And thank you for your presentation. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you, Indrani, but I disagree with you. It seems that you're right that object contains the possibility of combining with other objects.
Yes.
That is why he says that all objects are given, then the world is given, because all the possibilities are. But this world is the world of the totality of facts, not the value.
No, I'm not talking about, of course. No, what I'm emphasizing, that from the very beginning, when he's trying to limit the, what can I say, the realm of semantic meaning, there also a kind of holistic attitude is prevailing in his presentation. In fact, actually, we can say that his journey is from semantic meaning to beyond meaning of life, if you agree with me. That is, semantic meaning, it is in this world, in the domain of actuality, it is confined. But he will never say that what lies beyond the semantic meaning, yes, in one sense of the term, these are nonsense. Nonsense in the sense that they don't have any semantic meaning. But we can give different sort of value to that realm.
Yes, I agree. I agree with you on this point. Yeah.
So, any more questions, observations, Dr. Gole?
Thank you very much for that wonderful paper. No, I have no questions at all. Thank you so much.
Okay, so if there is no more questions, then we can wholeheartedly thank Professor Priyambada Sarkar for this thought-provoking presentation, and many issues have actually come up. We can think on them.
Hello?
Yes, you want to ask something?
And for
Kobita
beyond
Roy?
time,
Kobita
Can
Roy?
I ask something?
Yes, sure.
Hello?
Yes, very briefly,
Yeah.
please. Very briefly, since we have two more speakers. Yeah.
I'm Kobita Roy. My concern about the word misery. There are lots of I have so many concerns. I have so many queries, but all they are related to each other. In this regard, first of all, I want to know that about the misery. Is misery really exist in reality? This is the first query, and the second query is why do the world and the human life appears to the human as a misery? What is the main cause of the appearing the world and human life as a misery? So this is the second concern of myself. I want to these are the queries of myself. I want to know, and that's all. Hello.
we
Hello,
believe
madam.
in the miseries of the world.
Madam, I have two concerns. I have two queries, but these two queries are related to each other. First query is about the misery. That is misery really exist in reality?
Of course.
We talk about misery.
Yes,
Misery
this
of
is a miserable world.
of the world,
Huh?
and I am
Yes.
talking about the reality of misery. Is misery really
Yes.
exist in reality?
Yes.
And why do the world and the human life appears to the human as misery? What is the real cause behind this? Why we look at the world as misery? Why it appears to us as misery?
Like, why appear to us miserable? He is miserable. Like, for him, he had this thought of suicide, and I'll ask you to read his wartime diaries. The way he was gaining strength from spirit, from God, from this otherworldly thing, because it's leaving. Like, at every moment, you know that you are not going to leave, so that gives you a different feeling. So that is something very real. Why should it be apparent? I didn't understand.
Madam, can I share my own thought regarding this? Madam, can you hear me?
Yes, why not?
Very briefly, please.
I
Because we have
understand. I realize
have two more
about
speakers. Okay. Please be very brief.
And I said it. One thing, I tried my level best to be on time, because yesterday we were running 1 hour late. So I completed it within 2015. I started in.
Yes, Kobita Roy, you can later on you can contact Professor Priyambada Sarkar also, because we actually apologize to everyone that we have two more speakers, and Professor Sarkar already has answered many queries and observations, questions. So if we can move on to the next speaker. You can always
No,
contact us.
Hello, madam. I want to say that I think it is related to the world appears to us as misery. Is it something like this that it happens due to lack of knowledge of the reality? Because it does not appear to God as misery, because God knows the reality of the world. But we are human beings. We have limited knowledge. We are limited in our cognitive structure. So, is it the real cause that the world appears to us as misery? This is my main point.
In fact, every philosophical system has got its own presuppositions. So if you want to ask a question, you have to specify the exact system. Like Buddhist theory of suffering will not be the same as the Nyaya theory of suffering. And these two theories of suffering and misery of the world will not be the same as early Wittgenstein's theory of suffering. So I think it's better that if you specify your question and the particular system and its presuppositions, I think, and I'll be available, no problem. You can contact me later.
No,
Thank
madam,
you.
actually,
Thank you,
you have
Professor
mentioned
Priyambada
about the
Sarkar. I have to interrupt Kavita Roy, please, here to interrupt you. Sorry for that. And thank you so much, Professor Priyambada Sarkar, for the wonderful presentation. And discussions can always go on. You can contact Madam also later on. So many issues have already come up, and Professor Sarkar has patiently answered to all the observations, and thank you once again. So we move on to the next speaker according to our schedule. He is Dr. Anirban Mukherjee from the Department of Philosophy, University of North Bengal. He will be talking on Wittgenstein and the social bubble, recovering meaning, truth, and agency. Dr. Mukherjee is an associate professor in the Department of Philosophy at North Bengal University, and he has studied previously at Presidency College, Kolkata, Jadavpur University, and he did his PhD from University of Reading under the supervision of Professor John Preston, and he was also the associate fellow of Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Shimla, and he is my teacher also. So it's great to see you, sir, and we welcome you wholeheartedly. Thank you, Professor Sarkar, and we welcome Dr. Anirban Mukherjee for your speech, please.
Hello. Am I audible and is my computer visible?
You are audible and visible, absolutely clearly.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Purbayan, and all your colleagues at Gour University Department of Philosophy for organizing this wonderful webinar. I'm really shy of being, a participant in webinars, but I'm really happy to have kind of, accepted this opportunity to be part of this one. Thank you so much to all of you. So what I want to talk about is Wittgenstein and the social bubble. The title is Recovering Meaning, Truth, and Agency. The issues that will come up, and I'll try to deal with them, are regarding the social within which we have always lived. So our community, whatever place, that environment, whatever in a loose sense, and the social media that has cropped up within the last decade and a bit more than that. The impact of the social on meaning, truth, and agency. And how can we use Wittgenstein to understand this? We know that social media has kind of given rise to a lot of dilemma and a lot of issues for us in terms of our privacy, our position, in terms of our politicking, and also in terms of our connecting with each other. Plan of the talk would be Wittgenstein's cultural social determinism. So I'll talk a bit about the linguistic determinism that is there in Wittgenstein, especially in later Wittgenstein. I'll talk about the past and present of the social. How do we understand the social? And the question of subject, identity, and privacy. When meaning and truth are determined or controlled or limited, can there be any agency? Because our agency, our actions, our motivations, our responsibilities are to some extent dependent on our understanding the meaning and our commitment to certain truths. But if the way we understand meaning and the way we approach truth are to a large extent out of our control or not accidentally related or historically related to random things, but somehow manipulated, then can we at all have any agency? And within this kind of a system, can we recover agency at all? So I'll start with a bit kind of loose general introduction of Wittgenstein, because some of our students or people who are attending might not be that aware of where Wittgenstein comes from. So he is like quite an old person for us now. Like 1951 is the year that then he died, and it's more than 70 years since then. And many of us who know about Wittgenstein know that Wittgenstein had two phases, and now also people talk about the third Wittgenstein. So in the first Wittgenstein, the Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, he talks about philosophical problems as somehow being grounded in the ambiguity of language. The philosophical problems are not real problems. It's because there are certain ambiguities of language. We do not understand the use of language properly. That's why the philosophical problems crop up. And if they are not real problems, then they cannot actually be solved, but they have to be dissolved. And so we have to kind of come out from the natural language, ambiguous language issue, and move towards a language which is much more controlled and limited in terms of its design. And he also talks about a certain essentialism over there. He understands language as primarily descriptive. Maybe he doesn't talk about language as such or natural language, which may have other kind of uses and other kinds of ways of being, but he confines his discussion of language in Tractatus, and the way he designs the whole ambit of that discussion is in terms of this particular essence of language as descriptive. And he also talks about a certain theory of meaning, which is the picture theory of meaning. So language is also descriptive and representational. Language is like a picture of the world. It presents a picture of the world. And after Tractatus, he lets go of philosophy and does certain other things, which we'll come back to later. But then in the second phase, he does a kind of a more kind of a whole-bodied survey of language, and he deals with ordinary language as people use it. And over there, he takes a non-essentialist position. And he says that language has many uses. So that is the use theory of meaning. So language is not something that pictures only. It also pictures, it also describes, but it also does a lot of other things. We use language to fight with each other, to quarrel with each other, to talk to each other, to just have a conversation with each other, and so on and so forth. And he also talks about language as a tool. So language is used, it has a usefulness, it is something that we use to do a lot of things. Over there, he also talks about language games. Language games are another idea, which games, he says that there are different kinds of games, and there is nothing that is connecting all the games together. Like there is no one criteria which satisfies all games, and yet we are able to identify different activities as games. Now what connects them? They are connected by a family resemblance. Just like different family members are not identical copies of each other, but may carry certain resemblances. So we can identify them as being part of the same family. So similarly, different language uses, they are varied, but still we can kind of connect them and understand them as different kind of uses of language. And these are the different language games that we play. So it's not that one language game defines all kinds of language. We play different kinds of language games. These language games also keep changing, and these language games are rooted in a form of life. So we had a lot of discussion regarding this in yesterday as well, regarding how should we understand form of life. Form of life could be biological. Then we have one human form of life, and we could also understand form of life as different forms of life that different communities have. So different communities have different forms of life, and within those forms of life, they use language, they develop language evolves over there. And those language games, those uses of language are rooted in those forms of life. So to understand the language, to understand the language game, we also need to be aware of the particular form of life within which it operates. So if we want to learn German, we should go to Germany and spend time with the German people to understand how their form of life operates, what is important to them, what kind of rituals do they participate in, and so on and so forth. Now, I'll deal a bit more with the later Wittgenstein, and I'll be doing a bit of an experimental kind of study of Wittgenstein and how he can help us understand the social and the social media. So I'll start with the later Wittgenstein, maybe come back to early Wittgenstein at different points, and let's see how it goes. So the term language game is meant to bring into prominence the fact that the speaking of language is part of an activity or of a form of life. To imagine a language is to imagine a form of life. So we cannot understand a language without also thinking of a corresponding form of life. So languages are something that people use. So they are part of the human experience, human way of doing things, human life. And languages are not abstract in the way Tractatarian language was. So this is like PI language, where language is connected to the way people do things with language. They have a use. And the use determines the tool to a large extent. So we have the Eskimos who might have a lot of different kinds of ice that they have to deal with. So they would name different kinds of ice. But in India, we would not deal with too many kinds of ice because we just need a cube of ice to have a kind of juice or a drink with sometimes. So form of life includes our epistemic practices. Language games connected to forms of life, and forms of life also include our epistemic practices. In the sense, epistemic means knowledge-related practices. We have our knowledge beliefs in the sense we believe that there are certain kinds of people can give us knowledge. There are certain processes of obtaining knowledge, and there are certain kinds of ways which justify our knowledge claims. And this can also differ from one form of life to another. And this idea of language game, this idea of knowledge, and this idea of form of life are all connected to each other, as we'll gradually find out. Now, let's go to a bit of discussion regarding private language. Actually, he's trying to show that there is no private language. What is private language according to Wittgenstein, which does not exist? Now, if PI 256 is Philosophical Investigations 256, now what about the language which describes my inner experiences and which only I myself can understand? In 243, the individual words of his language are to refer to what can only be known to the person speaking. So another person cannot understand the language. By private language, he means language which is totally private to someone, which is not shareable. It's not a code language. Code languages can be shared with people. You can share the code and they will also know the language. In that sense, all language is code language. When we learn a language, we learn the code of that language so we can understand what is being talked about. But private language is essentially private. You cannot share the language. You cannot kind of deal with the experience of sharing because the language or the terms in that language refer to something which is very private, inner experience. And that inner experience, suppose of pain, is something that the other person may not have. So it's difficult for someone to share that connection between the word and the experience which is private. He goes on to say that this kind of language is not possible. Why? Because if I give a certain term to a certain experience that I only have, then I will not have any criterion to find out the next day whether I was using the term in the right way, whether I was using it to refer to the experience that I was having yesterday. In public language, in the language that we use, the language that we learn, like this is an apple, this is an orange, and so on and so forth. If a child or anyone while learning those terms makes a mistake, others can correct them. But with inner experiences, there would be a problem. So the inner experience is also is something that Wittgenstein says we actually approach through a public language. It's not a private connection, but it's a connection with the help of the public. Public is like people out there who already use the language and who help us to understand our inner feelings as well. So contra Descartes, who goes from inner to outer, like I think therefore I am, to the world out there, Wittgenstein goes from the outer to the inner. He says, okay, there has to be a world even to understand my own inner feelings. In that way, the public language defines our inner feelings. The public language, there is a language which has terms like sympathy, empathy, psychology, and this we know are like terms which are developing. Maybe 200 years back they had different meanings, or those words were not around, and now we have those words and we use them in a certain way. And these words are also loaded with different theoretical, weightages. So the public defines the inner. Now, truth as agreement. So knowledge, we said, I pointed out that I got a form of life, language game. Language game is meaning. Then epistemic practices connected to knowledge, and knowledge connected to some kind of truth. So he says truth is agreement. Truth is not in the PI, and later on in the uncertainty, truth is not something that you can actually find out. Truth is determined in the sense by human agreement. So you are saying that human agreement decides what is true and what is false. It is what human beings say that is true and false. And they agree in the language they use. That is not agreement in opinions, but in form of life. So if you are part of a form of life, then you use a certain kind of language, and the kind of epistemology that follows from it, the kind of knowledge beliefs or knowledge stances that you would have, are already ingrained in the language that you use. The language already has the concepts which are which assume the truth of certain things. So if you come from a very religious family or a very Catholic background, or if you come from an atheistic family, then you will have different ideas of truth and falsity regarding certain kinds of stuff. Okay. So again, in uncertainty, he says, if someone asked us, but is that true? We might say yes to him. And if he demanded grounds, we might say, I can't give you any grounds. But if you learn more, you will think the same. So what happens, like usually sometimes in analytic philosophy or even different branches of philosophy, which are not that analytic, but they try to prove their points, they try to justify their points. And that's what philosophy is all about sometimes. Like we want to kind of give arguments for whatever we think. And he says that arguments cannot be given after a point, because ultimately what counts is the kind of life that we have. And if someone says, okay, but do you believe in this? You think this is true? What we have to say is, okay, maybe you have to come and stay with us. You have to be in our ashram for a month, and then you will know what we think to be true and what we think not to be true. We cannot just tell you the truth. Okay. So the practices, they constitute the foundation. If I have exhausted the justifications, I have reached bedrock and my spade is turned, then I'm inclined to say this is simply what I do. So if you kind of push someone kind of very long, so ultimately he would have to say, okay, this is simply what I do. I can't kind of justify you any further. This is how we are. Now, giving grounds, however, justifying the evidence comes to an end. But the end is not certain proposition striking us immediately as true. That is, it is not a kind of seeing on our part. It is our acting which lies at the bottom of the language game. So I'll come back to this thing, like it is our acting which lies at the bottom of the language game. So why can't we give reasons? Because ultimately the foundation of our beliefs, of our epistemic stances are not propositions at all. They are our ways of acting. We have always been like that. We have always done those things. So we keep doing those things. Now, if the true is what is grounded, then the ground is not true, nor yet false. So this is again also a problem with foundationalism. That we want to give up. He says that if the foundations have to come to an end somewhere, and you cannot actually have a foundation which again needs to be proved again and again, which goes towards a kind of difficulties of foundationalism. So his foundationalism is a holistic foundationalism. These are all from uncertainty, where he says that our knowledge forms an enormous system, and only within this system has a particular bit the value we give it. So different beats do not in themselves have any value. They are part of a big knowledge system within which they play the role that they do. What we believe is not a single proposition, it is a whole system of propositions. And light dawns gradually over the whole. So we start with some propositions, we might be asking questions, we might be trying to understand more, and then gradually we understand the whole system. And it's like Priyang Bodadi was trying to answer before to Kobita, and she was saying that to understand misery, we have to refer to a certain kind of belief system. If you're a Buddhist, you would try to answer it in some way. And if you are of another sort of philosophical propensity, then you would try to answer it another way. To understand a proposition, to understand any kind of concept, you might have to refer back to the entire system of beliefs that is there. It is not single axioms that strike me as obvious. It is a system in which consequences and premises give one another mutual support. I have arrived at the rock bottom of my convictions, and one might almost say that these foundation walls are carried by the whole house. So this is a very interesting kind of foundationalism that he comes out with. Usually the holistic people are coherentists, but he kind of spells coherentism in a foundationalism kind of language, where he says the foundation need not be always in the bottom. In fact, the whole house might be holding on to the bottom. So the bottom is as much connected to the upper part of the house as the upper part of the house is connected to the bottom, and they give each other the foundation. And there is no foundation outside of that house. So in that sense, the house is actually a floating house, just like the earth maybe, like the earth is floating. We think of a house which is on a piece of land, but the earth is just floating somewhere. And of course, it is connected in terms of gravitational pull and push with other celestial bodies. But if something could be up in the air in that way. Now, the game of doubting and hinge proposition. Another thing it stresses about is that if you try to doubt everything, you would not get as far as doubting anything. The game of doubting itself presupposes certainty. So if you're doubting, if you're trying to understand, like for instance, again, Descartes gets to some place where he thinks that we cannot doubt anymore. Wittgenstein thinks that doubting presupposes certain things. He says presupposes certainty, but this would more the kind of presupposition that of certainty that is required is more of assumptive than it could be talked about certainty in a strong sense. So if you want to doubt, you at least have to understand that the language has meaning and what you are trying to say conveys certain sense. So this is a certain kind of rubber balloon that you have to catch on to in order to float your doubting journey. So the question that we raise and our doubts depend upon the fact that some propositions are exempt from doubt, are as it were like hinges on which those turn. So the doors have hinges, and the door, to keep the door open or to close the door or do anything with the door, you need the hinges. If you let go of those hinges, the door will fall apart, and then you'll have to close the door in some other way. So he's saying there are certain propositions, certain beliefs which are like hinges, and they kind of can't be doubted, even if you're doubting a lot of other things. Uncertainty again introduces another idea of the world picture. I did not get my picture of the world by satisfying myself of its correctness, nor do I have it because I'm satisfied of its correctness. No, it is the inherited background against which I distinguish between true and false. So this is again a world picture which I'm not sure about actually, which I have not found out to be correct, but which is the background for all my distinctions of truth. And the propositions describing this world picture might be part of a kind of mythology, and their role is like that of rules of a game. So this world picture again, which is again like a big, which might be part of a certain form of life, their mythology, their belief system, within which those community people, they make sense of certain things as true or false. So this true and false have nothing to do with the world. They are about their own world picture and whether things connect with each other. Then we go on to persuasion. Now, if people have different world pictures, suppose we meet people who, instead of the physicist, consult an oracle, and for that we consider them primitive. Is it wrong for them to consult an oracle and be guided by it? If we think that they are wrong, if we call this wrong, aren't we using our language game as a base from which to combat theirs? So these are like two world picture, two community, two forms of life, one thinks one has to go to a physicist to understand black hole, and another guy goes to, which comes from another form of life, goes to the oracle and asks him or her for the version of the celestial story. And is that guy wrong, or is this person wrong? The idea of wrong and right is relative to the whole world picture that they have. Now, I said I would combat the other man. Combat in the sense to prove wrong. But wouldn't I give him reasons? To prove someone wrong, I have to give that person reasons, certainly. But how far do they go? At the end of reasons comes persuasion. And persuasion with, italics, which means like, just like, and he says that thing, what happens when missionaries convert natives. So persuasion is not in terms of reason, it's in terms of some other thing. So because they belong to two different forms of life, one can't actually reasonably convert the other because the terms of reason are different. So what they can do is force or push the dominant form of life, dominant world picture on the other, based on whatever. It could be mere power, or it could be different forms of power. So where two principles really do meet, which cannot be reconciled with one another, then each man declares the other a fool and a heretic. So if they get together, it's not just, it's like in terms of two different continents, but even sometimes in the same house, people might be belonging to totally different, belief systems. And when ultimately they can't convince each other, they can't talk to each other, they can just kind of, abuse each other. So a picture held us prisoner. This is in the philosophical investigations, and we could not get outside it, for it lay in our language, and language seemed to repeat it to us inexorably. So language gives us a picture of the world. The language is not innocent. The language that we learn is already laden with a certain world picture. And that picture holds us prisoner, if not for life, for a very long time. And only very lucky people, or through their own will or through the force of other people, would have to change and adopt or learn or to be part of other pictures. And Wittgenstein doesn't say anything about which picture might be great. If there is a way of kind of, if you have the good luck or the good fortune of comparing between pictures, is there a kind of criteria? But the problem over there again would be, where does that criteria fall into? Because the criteria is again part of another picture. So the language repeated picture becomes part of us, and we see things through that. And over there is a kind of this drawing has a kind of reference to his aspect perception duck rabbit figure. So I'll get to that maybe after some time. So till now what we have got is language. Language doesn't only give us meaning, but also gives us beliefs, knowledge, a world picture. And this language is not a language that we kind of develop on our own. This language is a public language. This language is grounded in the form of life within which we find ourselves. So it is the social language, the social out there, which kind of just determines not just our meaning, but also our knowledge. Now, let's go to tractators, language, world, and subject. What is there in the tractators that can speak in this line, this fashion? And over there, we'll find that the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. So the limits of my language, he tries the solipsistic part to the public sphere. Limits of my language means the limits of my world. That the world is my world shows itself in the fact that the limits of the language which only I understand, mean the limits of my world. I am my world. Okay, so I am my world, the microcosm. The world is, in a sense, reflected in me. The subject does not belong to the world, but it is a limit of the world. So he says that the world is for the subject, but the subject is not part of that world. The I makes its appearance in philosophy through the world's being my world. This is a difficult stuff here going on, like in terms of the my world. Is it the solipsistic world, the world that only I inhabit? But no, the world of the spectators is actually a world that's for everyone. And the world that comes to me is through through again the language. The social as the source of meaning and truth. Wittgensteinian philosophy of language and epistemology stresses on the role of the social as the determinant of meaning and knowledge. If social or cultural context and community practices determine what is sensible and what is right or what is true, and we do not have any other criteria, then can we at all escape from the bubble we find ourselves in to understand the world out there? If independent epistemic and semantic evaluation of the bubble disappears in this communitarian view, then the ability or motivation to act based on one's knowledge and views become tentative at least, or dangerous at worst. Because you don't have a kind of grasp on truth and meaning and knowledge in the meaning maybe is part of the language, but truth and knowledge. So then your views become tentative. They become part of that community view. And there is nothing to kind of take you out of that. The social before, so now let's go to the social. The social before social media. Community view was always historical, accidental, and hierarchical. Community view, the community form of life, and the language. Power centers within the community determine what counts as knowledge and what is meaningful in what way. Language itself carries its own biases. We know all about the gender biases, but there are several other kinds of, there could be biases against certain communities, biases against certain kinds of jobs, and so on and so forth. So your social is limited again to your circle of people. The social is not the social, the universal social. This is what we do. It's not good enough, but also difficult to break out of. Ultimately, where do you learn all this? Where do you learn meaning? Where do you learn knowledge? Where do you know what is true and false? It is from the people around you. And the way Wittgenstein puts across our knowledge and language gathering process and the way we are stuck in it is not something easy to break out of. It seems kind of credible. Yeah, that's right. That's how it should be happening or would be happening. The media before social media. So of course, newspapers, radio, and television was there. Also books, plays, songs, folk tales, word of mouth, the person who has seen more. I don't know how far we can go and what kind of people we can get into the whole thing. But of course, news and views of the world could always or would always be mediated by others. People would come and tell you about something and you would believe them. And some of them would tell you convincing tales and you would find them more convincing and you would tell them to other people. Just like we now, share our, memes, or we find something attractive and we tell it to someone else. So all those things, newspapers, radio, and television, they had their reasonable biases. So some channel would cover news from a perspective or carry only those stories that they find important, etc. And this is a reasonable bias because, that's what an editor's job is, to kind of select certain news and present it from a certain perspective. And people would read certain kinds of newspapers or switch on certain kind of television programs because of what they covered. And that would also show whether they had similar biases. People maybe wanted to always connect with people with similar biases. It's not just social media. So sometimes they also, newspapers, radio, and television, carried paid news, fake news, unverified news. And so all these issues were always there. Now, what happens with social media or with social interaction and information seeking on digital platforms? What's changed is the digital profiling of the user in a much more efficient way. So the profiling of an user, the profiling of a person always takes place everywhere. Like we profile people as we meet them. Your local shopkeeper knows what you buy or what the people who buy there buy. So he or she would keep those kind of stuff, closer to the hand so that they can be sold easily. But digital profiling is more non-human and it's more efficient and it carries all the data of your interaction all the time. And we leave digital footprints, so to say. Whenever we go online, we kind of make digital footprints available for eternity. Whatever we do online stays online. You know? And customization of the information, advertisements, news, views, discussions by that platform for a user can be done based on the profile that they have. Okay, and from a Google to a Facebook to whatever, any kind of website to any kind of social media platform that you encounter, you post on, you share your videos, you just go and watch, you don't share anything, but you just kind of want to get information regarding other people. So whatever you do, for how long you kind of view certain pages, those informations remain with that site, and they know that this guy loves to watch this kind of stuff, and they will provide you with those kind of things. So the range of information available impacts the worldview of that user. So accordingly, they can provide information which can have an impact on my worldview. Okay, so the user acts on the basis of that worldview. For example, in elections, so we know about the Cambridge Analytica, a company which worked during a certain election in America and tried to, or in other countries as well, and tried to impact the electorate's behavior during election. So because they know so much about us, and they can find out what kind of a voter I might be, what kind of a political orientation I may have, and accordingly they may target me with certain kinds of pictures and visuals and comments which help me to, or incline me towards a certain kind of view, and consequently actions with social and political impact by the and through the digital platforms exist. Worldview, world picture, how I understand the world, and that impacts or kind of manifests itself in terms of our actions. Different kinds of action, not just voting, but I might ask my family people or talk to my family that this kind of politics is great, or this kind of view is good, and so on and so forth. Okay, and also in terms of, this is like a political issue, but it could be also a commercial issue. The past and present of the social. Manipulation of the social informational context to varying degrees has always been attempted to achieve the required popular perception of things. So everyone has tried that. Before social media, it's not that people didn't want to have an impact on how people saw their world, on the people's worldview. Those wishing to influence the behavior of others could insert a certain picture or a certain language game within the bubble to confuse and nudge one in directions that may have nothing to do with the truth. This has been the case forever. What is new in the current social media setup is that the bubble can be a personalized one. We may, as individuals or groups of individuals, be more efficiently fed with customized collections of news and views in order to manipulate us into forming specific assessments of the world. Okay, so can Wittgenstein help us deal with this? This is a very serious issue at this point of time, and it's very difficult to even try to deal with this or start dealing with this. So I just thought of how maybe we could start talking of having Wittgenstein here. So our digital self, what kind of a person are we online? So digital profile is created with data that we share about ourselves, our photos, views, kinds of content we search for, read, see, react to, etc. So we go on Google and we start typing a few words, and they will fill up the other words based on what kind of searches I usually do. So Google knows what I'm usually looking for. Google or any other, I'm not just kind of referring to Google, but different kinds of anything that we do online, we share our photos and views. So they have a kind of profile of the kind of person that we are. Everyone is not just a consumer of content, but also a creator and promoter. So as we kind of see things or what other people have posted or what kind of material is already there online, we can also make a video on YouTube, or we can share a comment on Facebook, or write share my view on Twitter. So we are like in a newspaper. You are only you're the person who reads the newspaper and occasionally writes a paper, writes a letter which may get published or not. But in the online kind of allows you to be a creator, and then you can also share other people's creations. So you become a promoter. So all these roles can be played by anyone. So in a sense, it's good because it's allowing you a platform to share your views, but it's allowing everyone a platform to share their views, which can again be problematic, and which can also, in a sense, it's great because everyone can, but on another sense, it's problematic, but because it's not, to some extent, edited, or it's not kind of fact checked. So even if everyone is not commenting online, you may be inclined to form an opinion about all from the ones you encounter. So this is again a problem because you encounter some of the comments. Everyone is not online, not commenting online, but the ones that you encounter, who might be the vociferous one, the abusive ones, you think everyone is like that. And you might kind of see that everyone has a view which is opposed to your view. So you might become shy of coming out with your own view, or it might be the other way, that you find everyone agrees with you, which might be because you have kind of already, unfriended all the people who held another kind of view. So all this gives you a very, skewed up view of the world and people, and also kind of distorts your view of the importance of your own views or experiences. So different entities, individuals, or groups may produce and spread deliberate lies to mislead. So once it's open to everyone, people may try to confuse you. Because people know that you are going to be online, you are going to be a gullible person, sometimes at least, even if you're kind of, that, okay, people might be spreading fake news, sometimes you will forget and you will start kind of believing what is there. So because that is your community now. Wittgenstein was saying that what you believe comes from agreement or what you have heard in your form of life. Now your community is a whole lot of people whom you don't kind of know that well, but because you see them, you see their views or see their visuals, they have a certain impact on you. Then there are the algorithms, the programs on the digital platforms that are learning continuously to be better at profiling, customizing, and monetizing content. So digital profiles are not just something that each website uses for its own benefit. So it's also something that is sold, and in the marketplace, so sold and used and abused for commercial and surveillance purposes without your knowledge. So there might be websites which know more about you in terms of your psychological profiling than maybe your family members or even you would be able to share with others. Okay, now how to break out? So what we used to usually think that, okay, if there is one kind of view out there which you think is problematic, which might be dogmatic, fundamentalist, whatever, so you access more, read more, then gradually you'll get a balanced picture. But at the present situation is that lots of information is also confusing. So you'll find a lot of information. It's not that all the information are actually different views which are going to balance each other out. Some of the views are just dangerous views to make you tilt towards those views to some extent. Okay, so contradictory stories and visuals, some of them are just lies using fake visuals and emotional content. Lies also have an impact on your judgment, even after you discover that they are lies, if you at all do, because they stay there, they become like a benchmark, and it's difficult to let go of those lies. Lies are placed to achieve that impact. So what can you do? Read less, be less online. Let's go to the beetle in the box. So this is something that Wittgenstein talks about, and he does that to prove the point regarding private language. Okay. So in private language, he says that if everyone, Spain was totally private and there was no way to identify or to refer to it, it would be like everyone carrying a beetle in their box, the beetle not being visible to other people. Okay, so we didn't know what kind of beetle that the other guy was carrying. So nobody knew about the other person's beetle. Suppose everyone had a box with something in it, we call it a beetle. Beetle is an insect, and you can see a picture of that. No one can look into anyone else's box, and everyone says he knows what a beetle is only by looking at his beetle. Here it would be quite possible for everyone to have something different in his box. Online also, everyone has a different personalized experience, a beetle in each laptop. So because my computer and the connected experience of Facebook or Google and other sites they know what kind of things I am interested in, or they think that I'm interested in, or they want to push. So they will kind of, if I kind of log on to Facebook, and you also log into Facebook, and we have the same friends, 50 friends for instance, we will see different posts from them. Okay, because but we might be thinking that we are going on to the Facebook and we should be seeing the same thing, but that's not the case. So each interaction is unique and private. Equipped with that interaction, one tends to jump with a comment, which again would be juxtaposed with other comments or visuals to provide unique experiences to other users. So you might feel, okay, these 5 things I've seen, I'm really extremely angry about this post and I want to say something, and you write something there, and that will again be juxtaposed with something for someone else. And those 5 things in terms of which they will appear will be different. So the meaning also might change there. So this illusory interaction with the community also makes us formulate rules of engagement online. So abusive language, rhetorical comments, or absurd views draw attention and hence get viral and seem to set rules of the language game to be played. So people want to be liked for what they are doing. So they want to get more likes, or even those websites want more engagement. So things that people love to see or usually cannot let go of would crop up more, because then that draws people to the website, and people spend more time on those websites. And the more time you spend on the website, it means more monetizable revenue for that website. If you are just quick and you are very kind of methodical, and you have a rule and you just go to the Facebook for 10 minutes and just see stuff that you require, then Facebook is not interested. So it is a different language game, the language game that operates online. It will take time for the presuppositions of it to be clear and for people to be cautious. Just as people don't watch television all the time. When the television appeared, people thought that people would really get busy watching television, they won't do anything else. And then internet appeared, and now of course we are in the midst of internet kind of revolution, and lot of digital things happening, especially during the corona crisis. People have been forced to work from home and communicate, even get educated from home through online and digital platforms. So the illusory transparency of language. This is another thing that Wittgenstein talks about as the aim of philosophy is to show the fly the way out of the fly bottle. So the fly gets trapped in the fly bottle. The fly bottle is made of glass, and you can almost see things outside. Just in language is also transparent, but the transparency is illusory. The transparency is not real. No, it's like a transparent glass. It's not something that you can go through. So, but there are openings. The way the path that you took to get into the glass might be a path that you can go, try to get out of. But it's difficult. If you try to sign out of any kind of platform like Facebook or any other platform, you'll see that it's difficult. Like in YouTube, for instance, if you click on something, the video stops. But in Facebook, if you click on the video will become bigger. So this is like the kind of contrary hand behavior that we are used to will force you to again kind of see more of it, and then you have to again get your motivation and control and say, no, I want to go out of this site or go out of this place, at least now. So the door that's unlocked, door is open, you can go out anytime, and opens inwards as long as it does not occur to him to pull rather than push. So if you keep pushing a door that opens inwards, you won't be able to go out. So you have to find a way. And philosophy is supposed to show you that way. Okay. So can Wittgenstein help again? So Wittgenstein, of course, didn't encounter social media, but the social community was always there. Language, games, and forms of life determine what we can say and what we think is right. This is what he says. We should read this as an alarm bell, okay, rather than as an anthropological and sociological truth about our epistemic situation. It's not just, we should not say, okay, this is how it is and that's great. He's just describing, as he says. Of course, we are now smart enough to know that descriptions are, of course, a certain theory about things. So 2 strategies that we can use: withdraw from social to understand language games. So we have to understand what Wittgenstein did during his time. He was really not happy with the academia at Cambridge, and he was really, not very happy with the academics and their pretentiousness. Okay, so he withdrew from the social to understand language games. And what did he do? He connected with the real to test the language games. The real, of course, can we actually pierce through the language games? That is another issue. But at least try to kind of come out with from that situation. So we know he went to a house in Norway, and he had a house in Ireland that he went to. Especially the Norway house, he went to at different kind of times in his life. And this was really secluded and nothing near it. And this is the place where he worked. So isolation, that was one thing that he tried. He went to war just after starting to work with or at Cambridge as a student and coming to the influence, being influenced by Russell and working there. He went to join the war, and over there the notebooks and certain early versions of Tractators and even the finished version, I think, were produced. And he ended up in the prison camp in Italy, and he wanted to come face to face with death, and he took duties on the front line. And all these is actually about trying to break out from the social and to kind of come to terms with the he got the Tractators published with an introduction from Russell, which he was not happy with. And then he left all this because he thought he solved philosophy problems, and he thought not much can be done by doing that philosophy. And he became a primary teacher, which he was not very successful at, but he left academia of the high profile sort. Then he became a gardener in a monastery. He wanted to become a monk, but they were not sure about his his intention. So gardener. Then he was designing his sister's house in Vienna for 2 years. And then he came across the Vienna Circle and came back to Russell and Moore and Cambridge, of course. But that isolation, that period of going away from the social, was very, very important for his development. Okay, so why Wittgenstein was not a Wittgensteinian? To become a Wittgensteinian is like a death of you as a person, or to become any part of an ism. So the philosopher is not a citizen of any community of ideas. That is what makes him a philosopher. The philosopher has to free himself or herself from the community of ideas, of crystallized ideas, as in philosophy classes. Okay. So, and then the Bergen edition of electronic edition has certain manuscript which he talks about. It is a main activity of philosophy to warn against the false parables on which our language of expression, without our being fully aware of it, underlies. So, being aware of the hidden agenda of language and to be very shy of becoming a part of a community of ideas. General community might be fine. You go and meet with regular people who don't have philosophical pretensions. That's fine. But like community of ideas, we have got the truth, just run away. So whereas in doing philosophy, you have got to be ready. This is something he talks, which is written in becoming a communist or joining a communist revolutionary party. He says, read the line, just last line. He's saying that if you are thinking as a philosopher, you cannot treat the ideas of communism differently from others. So it's very important to not become partisan. Okay, and becoming part of a certain group makes or stops you from equally evaluating everything. Let's go back to this aspect perception thing, which I just mentioned over there. This is a dark rabbit figure, and a dark rabbit figure is a figure that you can see as a duck as well as a rabbit. So these are the two aspects of that figure. And he says that I see that it has not changed, and yet I see it differently. I call this experience noticing an aspect. So many of you might be seeing this as a duck, some of you might be seeing it as a rabbit. But if you try harder, then you can see that it is also the other thing. Okay. And when you notice that other aspect, then that is also noticing an aspect. So there is an aspect change. When the aspect changes, parts of the figure go together, which before did not. So you see something in a certain way, and then all of a sudden it changes. Though nothing actually has changed in front of you. The figure remains constant, your perception of it changes. The way you see it changes. Okay, so And there could also be some people who are aspect blind who cannot see the other aspect. Okay, so they are confined to a certain aspect, a certain way of seeing that thing. So if we again go back to the early Wittgenstein part, the good and evil only enter through the subject, and the subject is not part of the world but a boundary of the world, as we discussed earlier. In the spectator, subject is there, he's like an observer, and he also has a figure of the eye and the world kind of appearing. And the good and evil is not in the world, it is in the subject. If there is any value that does have value, it must lie outside the whole sphere of what happens and is the case. For all that happens and is the case is accidental, what makes it non-accidental cannot lie within the world. If it did, it would be itself accidental. It must lie outside the world. Ethics does not treat of the world. Ethics must be a condition of the world, like logic. Okay, so there's logic, ethics, or aesthetics. They are outside the world, but in a sense, because the world is contingent. The objects are there, but the way they are and all that stuff can keep changing. But ethics, so what I want to derive out of this is that there is an ethical part. A lot of people, of course, have said that Tacitus has an ethical import, and himself says this in some points. But so it's not just forms of life and right, wrong getting selected there. But there is a certain kind of ethics which is in the subject. And how can we get that? How can we get that? Because it's in there, inside you. So maybe you could search within. So what happens in the post-truth world? Post-truth is like when we are generally skeptical about truth. Okay. So on the one hand, there is the issue of uncertainty that we somehow deal with in the everyday and science. We think of Corona and COVID as great uncertain stuff, but this is not uncertain. We had words to describe most of the things that we have now. We had a Spanish flu 100 years back, and it's only that we had forgotten about it, and it's not something that happens every day. So we didn't have planned for 2020 in this way. So on the other hand, there is a deliberate ploy, sometimes political, to infuse our understanding of the world with a sense of uncertainty and tentativeness, so as to obliterate our sense of how things are or can reasonably be taken to be. So if everything is uncertain, it's difficult to decide. More uncertain, or more you're going to be dependent on certain political forces, certain other forces, more you feel kind of tentative. But tentativeness is important because you're not sure. How can you pretend to be sure when you're not sure? So how can you be tentative and yet be in control of things? So one has to act in the everyday in spite of the tentativeness. And there is no escape from choice. So the post-truth dilemma is that data analytics and the ability in the hands of big tech and governments to control the elements in the belief game is there, because everyone is now online, everyone has access to internet, everyone is forming their views about the world, politics, people, relationship through their interaction with online quote-unquote friends and so on and so forth. And this interaction can be manipulated, and someone is watching, in the sense not actually watching, but kind of keeping a record of that interaction and your kind of your behavior in that interaction. And that knowledge is amazing because that can be used to make you believe certain things in a certain way and act in a certain way. So enlightenment can be thrown off balance, that I will gradually understand stuff and gradually get to know everything, and by making people skeptical of the very possibility of progress. Okay, so post-truth is deliberate confusions. Knowledge can be dubious can actually make us suspicious of all knowledge. And Wittgenstein also has these tendencies because he is skeptical, he's suspicious of the idea of progress, and knowledge is ultimately mere agreement, which is true. But how can we move towards a better knowledge? It can we go towards a kind of agreement which kind of stresses on more important stuff, kind of. But he's also cautious of the hinges and protects the ladder till the time comes to let go of it in both early and later. So can we make most of those hinges and ladders and move towards a certain reasonable truth? So between the two, a paralyzing uncertainty, we don't know, we are not sure. It's just to believe that we got some playing language game within a form of life, and the surety of the dogmatic ideological kind. Okay, this is our tradition, this is our form of life, this is what we do, this is what we have to, and so on and so forth. So these two kind of places, can there be a space for reasonable truths following Wittgenstein? Can we actually act in the world? Absolute contempt of truth may have run its course. No truth, you have to act. Okay, so many truth claims and many language games, again one has to come back to not always cancel each other out. They can also provide perspectives, but not by being within those language games all the time. Because then you're too much involved in those language games and the manipulations of that language game. So what Wittgenstein we can use is a Wittgensteinian exile that can help that perspective to emerge. We have to remove ourselves from the language games that are being played and station ourselves somewhere else to actually understand the import, to understand which one is actually a hoax and which one could be something that might be important to pursue. And we also need to remind ourselves of that part of the quotation. It is our acting which lies at the bottom of the language game. And sometimes we think that this acting is finished. And what goes on in the form of life, what has always gone on in the form of life, that is the acting, the people acting. But if we are part of that form of life, we are also acting all the time. So we have to act differently in terms of the perspective that emerges. If we act differently, the acting will change. And the acting will have an impact on the form of life and will have an impact on the corresponding language games that will develop in the coming years. Okay. So another world. We can go back to the tractators. So people might not be happy with this going back between tractators and philosophical investigations because it's like, people think, okay, we have to be chronological with Wittgenstein. So if good or bad willing is important here. We can go back to goodwill of Kant, maybe. If good or bad willing changes the world, it can only change the limits of the world, not the facts, not the things that can be expressed in language. In brief, the world must thereby become quite another. It must, so to speak, wax or wane as a whole. The world of the happy is quite another than that of unhappy. So the world doesn't change much, at least things around there. The way you perceive, again, makes the world change. So the first line you will find that things can, willing changes the world, it can only change the limits of the world. And limits, if you increase the limits, you maybe get in a bit of ethics, then you can get in something else. So the world must thereby become quite another. The world becomes another world. And the world of happy is quite another than that of the unhappy because they see the world differently. But of course, that stoicism is also there. You have to accept some. Peace in thought. That is the longed for goal of those philosophers. So philosophers want to sleep in peace. Wittgenstein, when he died, of course, he tried, committing suicide and all sorts of things throughout his life. But when he died, he had a happy life. Okay. So my life consists in my being content to accept many things. And substantiation comes to an end. Over here also we find that hinges kind of thing that we have to accept certain things in order to change other things. Time hoega na? Okay. So tractators, I think, kind of is something that reflects both these tendencies in Wittgenstein, like trying to say the unsayable and the silence. So there is a withdrawal. In the end, he says, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. But the Tractatus itself is not silent. It is trying to say the unsayable. It's trying to create perspective in the world. So that is the kind of acting. So my propositions, as Priyanka also kind of, I think, read this passage. My propositions are elucidatory in this way. He who understands me finally recognizes them as senseless. Is all the propositions are senseless, but not till you have climbed. When he has climbed out through them, on them, over them, he must, so to speak, throw away the ladder. After he has climbed up on it, he must surmount these propositions. Then he sees the world rightly. Okay, so there is this process. I think we haven't kind of spoken much about Wittgenstein's philosophy of action in terms of actually acting and trying to change the world. We usually think of Wittgenstein as someone who is non-committal in various ways, and usually also philosophers and other people, other like social scientists and other people are sometimes complaining about philosophers. That philosophers are more reticent about taking a stance, and we might be right because you don't need to be taking a stance for everything. But there is also a way of kind of understanding the situation and understanding how the different stances are related to the different forms of life and different kinds of social bubbles. But at the same time, unless you think of ways of moving towards some idea of better, it becomes very self-defeating and whole. Okay. So that's end. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I was wondering whether if the time had the time permitted, we would have gone on more on the many. Yeah. So many issues we have touched upon, and the social bubble and the relation between language and forms of life. Then how this entire social media forms different cultural milieu in the present world, and whether there is any bedrock of meaning at all, whether we can settle. But apart from the Wittgenstein's own understanding, and after all the darkness of the time, he in his life, still he says at the end, I say that till then I've had a wonderful life. I was thinking about the post-truth also, that the post-truth kind of where how to make any legitimate question, whether we can make an distinction between legitimate and illegitimate question, sort of, and because the social media is itself so much chaotic in many contexts. Although in many other contexts it gives many productive thoughts, one can argue. But anyway, I think others will also have to remark or comment, and thank you so much for your presentation. It was very wonderful. And we invite anyone to raise your questions and comments. So, Sharon, please.
Thank you. That was really a very thought-provoking paper and very insightful. I would just like to question the idea that you said knowledge, that it's knowledge that Wittgenstein is worried about. I think he's not worried about knowledge. What he is worried about is our claims to knowledge, because knowledge is knowledge, but our claims to knowledge is false. But knowledge, you have to remember, for him, is hinged on certainty, and our certainties cannot be false. Some of them can be ousted, they can be obsolete, they can become obsolete, like, imagine all those of the moon become obsolete. But so at least some of them can be, not universal, can be ousted. But your skepticism about the communities you seem to me a bit radical. You say we can never be sure of the use of our words. You said Wittgenstein thinks, or maybe you think, I'm not sure there. No, I don't think that's right. I don't think Wittgenstein thinks. On the contrary, for Wittgenstein, there's so many certainties that we can be sure in the use of our words. Now, Havel has that stance on which he thinks that for Wittgenstein, that Wittgenstein believes that you can never be sure, that he's concerned for metaphysics, really. He doesn't trust, he's got a nostalgia, he doesn't trust criteria, and he's got a nostalgia, as he calls it, for metaphysics. But Wittgenstein trusts criteria. Now, for him, if we couldn't be sure about the use of words, we couldn't disagree. There was no way we'd formulate our disagreement. So, I agree, however, with you that what we're seeing these days is the distortion of some very important, like facts, like truth. I mean, to be able to talk of alternative facts while still talking about, the local facts. You can say you believe that there were so many people at the inauguration. Well, that's there are alternative facts. There's no alternative facts. There were that many people. It's an objective fact. There's nothing you can do about it. But people are beginning to be prey to that kind of distortion of very important concepts. Now, this, in my view, is where it's appropriate to talk about dystopia. We are living dystopian times, I think. But so once the ordinary use of words is subjected to confusion, so our criteria of meaning once they become radically confused, then our language gets can't function properly. Now, what we can only hope for is that confusion will become rampant, and that it doesn't affect too many of our words, too many of our concepts. Because as Wittgenstein said, if I want the door to turn, the hinges, and I would add here, the hinges of language must stay put. Right? They've got to stay put. We have to remember that there have been quite a few such dystopian moments in history, and that we've gone through them. Do you think that this?
Yeah. Okay. So he understands knowledge, and in terms of certainty, again, he is related to the forms of life. So different forms of life may have different ideas of certainty ingrained in the language. So there would be a kind of idea of certainty within that form of life, within that language, which may not be, transferable to other language.
Just come in here. Those are the local certainties, but there are certainties in which all human beings are. There are universal certainties that people die, that people are born, that people can't live without oxygen, that people can't live without, that people don't fly. That horses, trees don't become men trees, that mountains don't spring up in it. These are universal, and there are many such innumerable certainties. That's what we live on. And those you can't get us, or do you think you can?
It depends, because those are so ingrained in our idea of certainty that we can't think of people who may have different ideas of certainty or might be skeptical about what we think are certain. The very idea of certainty, if you understand in terms of form of life, then would be that people who are part of that form of life would think those to be certain, and something that, can't think of another person, can't think of that as uncertain in any way. So what you are mentioning as certain, I agree with it, but we all are part of a wider form of life now. But one could also go back to the biological form of life, and there could be some truths as relevant to human existence, which are biological nature, and which everyone, whatever be the form of life or geographical, historical positioning, they have to kind of take for granted. Just like this corona thing, this has affected everyone, and you have to, this is like the world in our kind of like, it's not happening. But we also understand this corona and also biological things. The word that we used to understand this biology is also different. cultures may have different biologies, different historical times may have had different understandings of the human body and the connection between the human and the non-human, of human, birth and death, and different kinds of understanding. And they would not think of death as the way we think death is the end of everything. And so I can't kind of conceive of certainties which are beyond my conception of certainty. And as part of this world picture thing, the use of course, delineated within a language by the use itself. That's how people learn the use of language, and they are corrected. And if they are not using it in the way that they are supposed to within that language game. Now, the internet, has all of a sudden brought, I think, different forms of life, different politics into conflict with each other, and given a voice. But giving everyone a voice is again problematic because everyone is not ready to hear a person's voice, not just in terms of party, but also in terms of understanding. We can't understand other people. Maybe someone from a certain culture uses a term which I understand because I understand the term, but they use it in a normal kind of conversation. For me, it is a very abusive term. So it depends, because all of life are now, as others, they were functioning as different kind of spaces, but everyone comes in together. And form of life, I think, is like a countrywide, nationwide phenomenon, but it's like different forms of life could be there. Or at least different language games could be there, and they could be part of our own country, our own neighborhood, and they have a different kind of language game that they play. And I might be part of the same WhatsApp group, and I would be really, going crazy with their.
Yeah, but I think that you're finding it very chaotic because you're not making that distinction that Wittgenstein makes between the various, language games that are based in specific human forms of life, and the one human form of life which you say, you might be wrong about it. If you're talking about a human form of life, and you say, no, it could be possible that people are not born and don't die. You're only talking about the human form of life. You're talking about science fiction. That's something else. If you can conceive of a form of life where people don't die, where men become invisible and women become invisible, all that, it's possible. It's science fiction. We're talking about the human form of life. And there, Wittgenstein says, if you don't believe, or if you don't express emotion, tribal people never say, this is not human. If you don't think that people are born, then there's something pathological. That's what Wittgenstein says. There's something pathological about people who think that themselves, there's such a thing as the Descartes, for instance, where people think they're dead. That's a delusion, right? And Wittgenstein very, very often in Uncertainty says, if you say that, you're a half-wit, he calls me all kinds of things, a mad, a half-wit, or something's wrong with you, right? There are certainties about which we cannot disagree. That's what he's trying to say. Now, I think that you're confusing those with certainties that we share in different forms of life, and those we can disagree on.
No, I think we should also distinguish, like we can have an idea regarding a biological human form of life that distinguishes humans
not
from
only biological, the human form of life includes cultural, like learning a language is part of the human form of life, and that's not biological.
Okay, but language, the ability to learn language is biological. We learn language because we have a certain kind of brain structure and we have
not sufficient. The biology is not, the brain is not sufficient. I mean, Wittgenstein would be the first to distinguish between brain and mind.
But whatever, like there is a certain, whatever be the human form of life, the understanding of the human form of life differs across culture. And the conflict over there, as I read about world pictures, so when people come to that equality and the fool, but the conflict remains.
Okay, we'll agree to disagree. I think. Because somebody else is. Thank you.
Shall I just, do you think that the post-truth era has some positivity? If one can say that if there are no one single truth can have multifarious ways in that. So you want to relate this to Wittgenstein's perspective in that?
No, because like even Foucault and other people, they talk about knowledge as something determined by power rather than by truth. So, so this kind of confuses people regarding the idea of truth is important because the truth is something that we can get according to the philosophers. And so even Wittgenstein talks that ultimately agreement. So people agree on something, and that agreement translates into that thing as being their knowledge within that community. So agreement again, if we meet Foucault and Wittgenstein, the agreement of whom? Who needs to agree for something to become quote knowledge? It's not the most powerless people in that community. It has the powerful people who would agree about something, and that would be taken as the knowledge for them. But these kind of ideas of distancing of knowledge from the idea of truth, and the later kind of multifarious truths, multifarious ways of presenting different versions of the world, and as with internet and other ways of publishing oneself, uh, it became difficult to understand what is truth, what is true about the world. But in that kind of a situation, you can never act. You cannot decide for world, for yourself, for anything. You need to have some grounding of truth. And if that grounding is just community belief and agreement, that is not enough. The agreement was based on what? That has to be the question. Why did they agree regarding this? Either you can say they agreed because this has been useful for them. Believing this has been useful for that community. Believing that it rains in this at this time and sowing the seed at before that. This is a noise because they have acted on this and they have reaped the benefit. So the agreement actually based on some kind of feedback from the outside world. So otherwise there has to be some point of agreement. What kind of agreements count?
To arrive at
any agreement cannot be taken as knowledge, because then we are all like some great people agree about some random stuff and we are all going in that direction, and we are like we don't know where we have to ask, why did you agree on this and not something else? The agreement has to be given reason, and ultimately you can't give reason, which might also be true.
But if you see for making some policy, we have to the politics have to arrive at consensus. The approach has to be there to be in a consensus to some extent, even if there might be difference of opinions.
But we also kind of judge that consensus. If that consensus is based on political advantages. So different political parties agree with each other because they think this is going to help all of them, not the cause of the people. Then we do not have consensus is good. The consensus is only good when it also takes into account the real issues. Okay, if there was one person who was actually had a reason over there, but he was not part of the consensus, all the people got together and that person out, then consensus is nothing great.
Yes. We can more on this.
The pragmatic aspect of it is very much acceptable to you.
If there is no correspondence seems unachievable. Ultimately, there is the agreement. I agree with Wittgenstein, the situation that situation talks about. I think that's how it is. Like ultimately, we use certain concepts to understand the world. We are within a language game, and we kind of agree. But there has to be more to that agreement, and that what is there to the agreement. Ultimately, there cannot be you want to go why that. Maybe we'll have to stop somewhere. We should have sufficient number of steps which are connected to our general feedback from the world order or world system comes beyond us. That kind of is the basis of agreement. We have to ask that question: what is the basis of agreement? And I think we can. I think I would hope you can find something there, or otherwise Wittgenstein was not Wittgenstein. We don't need to be Wittgenstein. We need to be concerned about question, not. But we should not kind of wrongly ascribe something that we didn't think of on Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein keeps it so open that he has been more interpreted in different ways and understood in different ways. And that's also the part of the interesting bit about Wittgenstein. Because Wittgenstein does not actually write everything that he was thinking about at that point of time. He just writes certain sentences and which leaves out a lot, and which the reader can fill in with their way of understanding Wittgenstein, how they connect the different parts of Wittgenstein.
Yes. Anyone else? If anyone else doesn't have anything to comment, we can move on to the next speaker. So thank you, sir, for the wonderful speech and the discussion followed thereafter. We are now we will have one more speaker, the last one of the webinar. So I request Dr. Charesh Fargo, if you are there, and Professor Daniel is actually leading us, and he expresses our apologies to Dr. Gour that for the inevitable he has to leave. So we welcome Dr. Gour, and I request Dr. Charesh Fargo to introduce him.
Okay, thank you, Purvan. Thank you, Dr. Oriwamari. We had a really very nice talk. It's a very thought-provoking talk. I really inspired your talk. Now we are at the end of our journey. So in this time, now I invite Dr. Parvez Jam Gour, who teaches philosophy in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. He has a PhD in philosophy from university. His area of research and publication lies in the historical tracing of concept and in philosophy of language. His forthcoming works include a monograph exploring the historical tracing of the concept of meaning and value, and another that explores the nature of the autonomous life in Nietzsche, Kant, and Shea. He is a co-editor of Cultural Ontology of the Self in Men and also Teaching in Unequal Societies. Today, he will share with us on functionalism and the thesis of determination meaning in Wittgenstein. With these few words, now I invite Dr. Bole. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. I know all of us are hungry, and so I'll make my presentation really very brief. As the abstract it was suggests, my paper has two parts. The first part deals with the Tractatus, and the later part with the philosophy of the time. Fortunately for me, yesterday's talk by Professor Sarok was highly insightful. Actually, I echo almost all of her views in the paper, of course, independently. Therefore, it is easier for me to skip the second part because by and large, I echo the same view. Except if she was present here, I would really like to have asked her if she holds this foundationalism to be propositional, because in my view, the later variety of foundationalism that Wittgenstein holds is not propositional. So, having said that, because time is short, let me make my grounds of reading Wittgenstein slightly more explicit. I am very sympathetic towards the transcendental reading of Wittgenstein, which was promoted first by Eric Linus in his 1959 work, and I largely follow the transcendental approach to understanding the Tractatus at least. So that's my ground of interpretation. Now, what are my contentions? I basically have contentions. The first contention being that there is an unnecessary emphasis on language and realism in the scholarship that deals with the Tractatus more than what is required, and that both determinism as well as the idea of absolutism does not demand either language or, for that matter, the word. And that is going to be the idea that I'm going to promote here. Following this, I would like to argue that what language provides, of course, is the shareability aspect rather than the aspect of determinacy or sense. Following this, I would like to therefore show how the form of a kind of forgiveness of the materiality of the empirical world is very much present in the Tractatus itself, which is then, of course, used in a very different direction by Wittgenstein in his later books. So, thank you, Prabhayan, for organizing this and making this possible, and at least virtually making me, together with some of the people that I'm familiar with and know them, Professor Priyamada, Professor Inakshi, and the others who are here, Professor Indrini, and also Anirban, who is such a pleasure always listening to. So, with these initial remarks, let me begin my paper. So, unlike Frege, Wittgenstein's account of sense as well as his account of nonsense, as offered in the Tractatus, does not demand of him to adopt a realist position. So, he fundamentally adheres to it and upholds a realistic stance. That is undeniable. After all, the demands of both sense and nonsense squarely rest within the confines of the realm of the thinkable in the Tractarian account. A picture, Wittgenstein remarks, is simply contains the possibility of the situation that it represents, and that it does so independently of its true paucity by means of its pictorial form. After all, as Wittgenstein asserts, the pictorial form is the possibility that things are related to one another in the same way as the elements of the picture, by 2.203, 2.22, and 2.151. This leads Wittgenstein, as is well known, to postulate that uneasy and highly problematic relation between the pictorial form of a conceived fact or thought, or the underlying form of thought, from the logical form of reality or the form of fact that is being taught. Hence, after all, is quite unlike how Frege has proved it to be, for it is, in Wittgenstein's view, independent of truth, therefore independent of the world. Of course, both Frege and Russell painstakingly built the philosophical foundations upon the neo-Kantian idea of subsistence, as invoked by Lotze in the 19th century as the fundamental mark of being. But it is only in the Tractatus that it comes to acquire the function of demarcating the realm of thoughts or sense from that of existence in absolute terms. Perhaps to emphasize this fundamental shift, in contrast to particularly Frege, who as both Eric Recke as well as von Wright take as the most central influence on Wittgenstein, Wittgenstein writes that the sense of the world must lie outside the world of fact. by 6.41. The Tractarian mode, therefore, thoughts about facts are inviolably independent of matters of existence of the facts about which they are thoughts of. It is this absolute independence that comes to be asserted in 6.273, wherein Wittgenstein in no indefinite term clarifies that the world is independent of my will. For Wittgenstein, this independence is deemed to be a necessity to foreground the causal independence of the realm of thoughts from the world. Thus, in a peculiar manner, this move completely undermines any traditional form of realism or idealism that uses the realm of thought as a premise to either assert or deny realism. It is in light of this insight, and here I'm just saying perhaps, that leads Wittgenstein to remark that Moore's frontal attack on idealism does not amount to much. It is also perhaps for this reason that Tractatus seems to be completely silent concerning the establishing of realism itself. It seems quite disinterested in proving that the world exists. This silence, to my mind, is suggestive of the fact that in the Tractatus itself, Wittgenstein takes the isness of the empirical world in its materiality as an accepted given. In his claim that it is his claim that it is mystical the world is, by 6.4, is this claim an attempt to frame this precise condition? It is perhaps this that influences S.S. Barlinge to hold that both realism and idealism are beyond proof, since they are originary presuppositions of philosophical reflections itself, and that these positions have to be clearly distinguished from other philosophical assumptions which demand rigorous proof. They also, so to speak, do not apply to the categories of beliefs that are presuppositions, as Banga asserts. Wittgenstein rejects categorization of these traditional presuppositions as beliefs. He would perhaps be sympathetic towards the gist of Barlinge's assertion that the existence of the world as it stands in its materiality is beyond the beliefs that can be questioned. It is this conviction, and is this conviction not expressed when he writes, skepticism concerning the existence of the world is not irrefutable, but is rather nonsensical, like 6.51. That the world exists is simply a philosophical given to Wittgenstein, not a conclusion of a philosophical or dialectical inferential process. The materiality of the world, including our material existence, is simply a precondition for us to even start any form of rationalization. A belief, I believe, is central to later Wittgenstein as well, as implicated by his formulation of the often debated but the central notion of form of life with life in the singular. Most of this aspect will follow in the second section of my paper, which of course I am not going to present here. Of course, while accounting for the ascriptions of truth value, the matter is altogether different. Like concerning the sense of a proposition of science, truth values, surely the virtue of its pictorial relationship demand the world of facts. It is here that Wittgenstein now relates construed pictorial form with the logical form. And here is what Wittgenstein has to say about this. Since there are no sensible thoughts or pictures that are true a priori, therefore, in order to tell whether the picture is true or false, we must compare it with reality. The question is precisely how does this become possible? After all, they are independent and self-contained domains. It is, after all, precisely this independence that Wittgenstein uses as a premise to argue that we cannot, after all, ascribe a truth value to a legitimately sense-giving thought by merely understanding its sense, and thereby successfully legitimating the condition of bipolarity as a fundamental mark of the thought. It is this mark of the biconditionality that plays as a leveler, so to speak, to ensure that all propositions are of equal value, in that none are neither necessarily true nor necessarily false. So given this independence of the realm of sense, where are we to find the middle ground, so to speak, between the realm of fact, or how the world happens to be, and the realm of thought? And as we are all familiar, Wittgenstein's resolution of this problematic is through the invocation of what he calls the possibility of pictorial relationship by 1.1514. Elucidating his position through a series of remarks, Wittgenstein writes, the pictorial relationship consists of the correlation of the picture's elements with things. These correlations are, as it were, the feelers of the picture's element with which the picture touches reality. That is how a picture is attached to reality. It reaches right out to it. It is led against it like a measure. Only the endpoints of the graduating lines actually touch the object that is to be measured. So a picture conceived in this way also includes a pictorial relationship which makes it into a picture. The picture relationship, the pictorial relationship, consists of the correlation of the picture's elements with things. Clearly then, for the time, the possibility of this pictorial relationship is itself a necessity. If these facts are to be conceivable, as well as, and as we are well familiar, it is precisely this Tractarian emphasis that logical positivism enthusiastically adopts in the rejection of metaphysics. Of course, in their over-enthusiasm, they unfortunately miss the fine print that pushes us to remember that it is not that the pictures that I can put in order to make sense. Rather, it, as Wittgenstein tells us, touches only the endpoints. The point of the picture terminates. We know that the picture terminates in logical logic, which then probably entails that we must hold Wittgenstein as being metaphysical, but not ontologically, to hold that facts must then have such terminating logical points as well, in order for the logical objects of thought or the picture to correlate to. It's precisely into these terminating points of thoughts and facts, these logical and metaphysical objects, so to speak, that ensure the pictorial form speaks to the logical form. But this possibility, as Wittgenstein tells us, must be pre-contained in its pictorial form itself. In Wittgenstein's word, every picture or word that is sense-bearing is at the same time a logical one, by 2.182. Once again, Wittgenstein clearly sees truth values not as objects in our world, or in any world for that matter, as Frege. Rather, Wittgenstein sees it, truth value is what I call a relational emergence that emerges when a thought successfully connects with an empirical fact in the world as it stands. It is, as Wittgenstein tells us, not something in the world, but something that emerges by virtue of it, by 6.4. Imagining Wittgenstein's own picture of the mode of how the two independent realms of thought and fact intercept is Wittgenstein is brought to the foreground in the 1960s, followed by William Banga later, that the Wittgensteinian framework echoes the Leibnizian picture of a pre-established harmony. Wittgenstein, in a series of elucidative remarks, writes, what any picture or whatever form, must have in common with reality in order to be able to depict it correctly in any way at all is logical form, that is, the form of reality. A picture whose pictorial form is logical form is called logical picture, and that such pictures can depict the world by 2.18 onwards. Just as Wittgenstein sees it, Frege presents us with only half of the truth when he asserts that sense demands that thoughts be legitimately constructed. The other half of the truth, which Wittgenstein insists follows logically, is that it cannot help but be legitimately constructed if it is sense, since a sense-bearing picture is at the same time a logical picture by 473. The possibility to originate nonsense, therefore, does not lie in a failed pictorial relationship at all. All failed pictorial relationship, as Wittgenstein assures us, simply entails that it is false rather than rendering the thought itself nonsensical. Thus, not merely sense, but even nonsense is independent of the realm of facts, a fact that takes the notice of the positivist rendition of Wittgenstein's position. As is clear, nonsense must therefore find its origin elsewhere. And that elsewhere, as Wittgenstein tells us, is in the mode in which the realm of thought relates to the realm of science or language. Wittgenstein, by means of discrimination in thoughts and the world, thus emphatically asserts in proposition 3.24, as it does in many other places in Tractatus, that sense is internal to the proposition of science, purely in terms of its projective determinate pictorial relationship, or what is sometimes called the representational form by 2.173, 74, and 4.462. As a field projection, it's still sense-bearing, false rather than nonsensical. But as I see it, Wittgenstein's realism in the context of Tractatus, so definite and unassailable, is nevertheless not the bedrock or the foundation upon which the Tractarian vision of sense or meaning stands, given the bounds of sense are independent of. This is, of course, quite a different picture in the investigations, and more so in uncertainty, where this material emerges as a key player, or in fact, I would go on to the extent of asserting it as the only foundation that Wittgenstein believes one can ever take resort in. Clearly, I read Wittgenstein upholding a foundationalist position in his so-called later avatar. It is obvious, as my extract has made it clear, that I uphold a foundationalist stream of later Wittgenstein, largely in consonance with Stroll's line of thought, but unlike Dukan, I hold this foundationalism to be non-propositional in nature, because more of that was outlaid in the second half of my paper. As we are familiar, the foundations of the shared sense, however, is not in the realm of sense. So what makes sense shareable is not within the domain of sense itself. The foundations of the shared sense lie in the fact that the logical syntax of meaning are in that sense mimetic, or as it is often seen, are isomorphic structurally to the logical forms of simple objects with forms included. And since, as Wittgenstein informs us, that the form of a simple object in the logical space of conceivable fact is its internal property, which demands in a manner of speaking that these objects contain the necessary possibility of occurring in state of affairs or atomic facts in Ogden's work, we are assured in the Tractatus that thoughts come to have determinate structure. After all, as Wittgenstein informs us, structure is precisely ensured by the forms of the simple objects, by 2.033. And since these objects are simple and can only relate in determinate ways with other simple objects, thanks to their logical form, we are further ensured by proposition 2.027 onwards that objects are what is unalterable and subsistent. Ogden, of course, has not made any distinction between subsistence and existence, and this object thereby ensures the foundations of sense. So it's completely independent of the world of facts, it's completely independent of the world of language. They are, as Wittgenstein calls it, the substance of the world, providing us the formal and universal structures of thoughts, all included by 2.0231. This thereby guarantees the determinacy and the functionalism of sense, but not the shareability aspect of sense. And to ensure this, he quickly adds, so that we do not lose sight of the logical independence of the realm of thought, that the realm of subsistence from the world of facts, that is the realm of existence, that they are distinct logically, that these are able to do so independently of what is the case. This is proposition 2.024. A sense to be shared demands the act of communication or expression. We are aware that Wittgenstein holds thoughts at the empirical level of natural expressions as linguistically constituted, that is, at the level of the natural language. To have thought is, of course, to involve in language. It is here that the third realm of language or science, as far as the shareability aspect comes into play, and they play a crucial role. It is what Wittgenstein tells us. In a proposition, a thought is an expression that can be perceived by the senses. This is proposition 3.1 onwards. We use the perceptive sign of proposition, written or spoken, as a projection of a possible situation, that is sense. The method of projection is to think of the sense of the proposition. I call the sign with which we express a thought a propositional sign, and a propositional sign is a propositional sign in its projective relation to the world. It is clear then, simply by virtue of the logical independence of the realm of thought, the realm of science is not at the logical level its constitutive partner. At the natural or empirical level, surely thoughts cannot be shared without the help of science that is saturated with sense, or what Wittgenstein calls a symbol. A symbol is a, so to speak, a complex that can be perceived by sense, such as a word that is spoken or written. Of course, it is also true, however, that Wittgenstein himself markets the independence of the realm of the science at the logical level, given that he distinguishes the logical syntax of simple signs of name from the logical forms of the simple objects. It is the logical syntax, so to speak, that must somehow be able to mimetically enable names to stand proxy for the logical form of the object, as well as the determinate relations of sense that obtains between them in what has been traditionally labeled as the elementary propositions. It is precisely this mimetic possibility ensured by the logical syntax of names that ensures that every proposition has one and only one complete analysis, and ensures that what is shared is articulate and clear. This is proposition 3.25 onwards. Delineating this independence of sense at the logical level, Wittgenstein provides the following mark. Of course, recall here that the meaning of a simple sign or a name or a sign is the meaning of the object that stands proxy for. So keeping this in mind, we look at the remark, consider Wittgenstein says, in logical the meaning of a sign should never play a role. Right? In logical syntax, the meaning of a sign, which is the object that with that sign, should never play a role. It must be possible to establish logical syntax without mentioning the meaning of a sign. Right? This clearly entails that language at the logical level is to construe purely as propositional functions with various relation possibilities as limited by the logical syntaxes of the simple names constituting them. They are, so to speak, hollow and empty, but saturable by the components of the construed act or components of our thought. Wittgenstein makes it clear when he writes, this is by 3.318, like Frege and Russell, I construe a proposition as a function of the expressions contained. At the empirical level of everyday natural language, it is merely a propositional variable that can be separated by sense in a manner that the sign can transform into a symbol, something that is shareable and perceptible as long as the syntactical system allows for the complex sign to accommodate the logical form that is brought about by the sense. There is nothing intrinsic to the sign per se that demands that it necessarily be a proxy for a particular sense. Therefore, Wittgenstein writes in 3.3, a sign is what can be perceived of a symbol, and thus the same sign which was spoken can be common to two different symbols. Notwithstanding the strict logical independence of the logical syntax of language from the realm of thought, Wittgenstein nevertheless maintains a necessity of these two realms interweave together, so to speak, in the realm of our actual thoughts and our natural language. Like this interwoven of the sign and sense within the symbol, he writes 3.36 on this. In order to recognize a symbol by its sign, we must observe how it is used with a sense. Sign does not define a logical form unless it is taken together with its logico-syntactical employment. These sets of remarks clearly suggest that what ensures that sense-making proposition must necessarily have a determinate, and what is more important, a single analysis is not the virtue of its logical syntax per se, which itself comes to be of any use only within its interwoven state with the logical form. It is precisely the realm of sense that in the final analysis of practice that comes to ensure both determinacy of sense and foundationalism that is demanded of sense. This is the same as saying that determinacy of sense is what forecloses any variety of relativism insofar as sense in the tractatorian framework is concerned. Thus, the tractatorian foundationalism therefore entails absolute determinism as well, which as we shall see, the variety of foundationalism that Wittgenstein seeks to promote in his later works, especially the philosophical investigations and uncertainty. And now, by this, so I simply conclude by saying, so by this, what can be seen as a connecting thread is the manner in which Wittgenstein takes the givenness of the world as a sort of transcendental condition, so to speak, and that this condition in practice, however, has nothing to do with the determinacy of sense, nor as the aspect of science, the logical critical role to play at logical level as far as the determinacy of sense in these practices is concerned. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gole. I think you have more to say, but we are actually at the end, and really thank you for the issue you have raised, and we thank you that invitation for the last week.
Thank you and your department for having us here.
Yes,
thank you.
Most welcome, and you have discussed on various aspects on the meaning, right from practice to the research of Wittgenstein, and the logical difference language, whether the possibility of these and many other issues, and I request anyone from the faculty to represent on the speech to the it was a presentation. It was deep, of course, you were really right at the point. Thank you, Dr. Gole. Students, I request students and research scholars, Dr. Gole is wants to respond to them. The students and research scholars are department of investigations and practical curriculum both for right. So I invite my scholars, research scholars. There is no problem with language. You can translate English if you are having asking English. There is no problem with language. Students and scholars, please. More wants to say something about? Along the research you wanted to ask, but we couldn't find the time. Any scholar students? I'm preferring the scholars and students because they haven't really spoken up. They prefer.
I want to. I cannot manage the video. But can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
It was very so succinct and to the point. I really enjoyed your illustration of the practice there. In fact, I have been happy that if you had continued and contrasted this view of the practice with the second phase and third PI and on term. And I just need to have your full length paper.
Sorry, I will mail it to you. I have your email. I'll mail it to you because I have the paper and script, so I can mail it.
Dr. Gole, in 5 minutes or so, you can, if you want, you can elaborate or point out some more things in 5 minutes or so if you want to.
No, I can sum up my position as far as the later Wittgenstein or the so-called later Wittgenstein goes by saying that there is this givenness of the world which I think Professor Moyokis today was sort of talking in terms of what she called universal certainties. So I believe that these universal certainties are also present in the investigations for sure. However, the foundationalism of the investigations leaves this element of absolute determinacy very flexible. So in other words, I also, within my understanding as well, I do make a distinction between form of life and forms of life. And I don't really go along with Hacker and Becker in saying that, well, Wittgenstein is only talking about the cultural aspect in his notion of the form of life, because I believe that the materiality of the world for Wittgenstein is an absolute precondition. That you
part of his thinking, he was opposed to any sort of theorizing. Because theorizing that brings problems into philosophy. Like it's a kind of disease from which he wants to make philosophy free. Like it's like cluttering within the bottle. So as he was opposed to any sort of theorizing, so I feel that that application, or if we say that Wittgenstein had this kind of foundationalism that is different from such and such kind of foundationalism, everything comes under this this purview, this faulty thing that this
is why I was saying that I share Anirban's this one, because if you say that you can talk about these initial primitive forms to which you are reacting as an animal, quote unquote, then that makes this whole way of looking at them as primordial prior to language as utterly incompatible. This view becomes incompatible. So as long as we are talking of those fundamental certainties, we can't put them either in propositional form, belief form, or I don't know. So that's my question. So how do we put it? Or how do we understand it? How do we characterize it? So that is, but I don't think that accepting this variety of foundationalism will lead to theorization. Because theorization surely requires language.
Yes, and I think there is a tension here. I have a feeling. I'm not
Yes,
absolutely
yes.
sure.
No, I share this anxiety, and that is why I feel that there is this tension, because the tension is precisely now how do we understand it, or is there no requirement to understand it? So things like that, those kind of questions do crop up. Yeah.
The post-structuralist
Thank you so much for this.
way of seeing language, treating language in terms of not seeing the language in a very centered manner, right? That where the truth or message is actually from out of the center. It is not the way the post-structuralist would argue. So, in that sense, do you think that theorization will will be hampered if we counter this from the post-structuralist point of view, or even from Derrida, for example. We can discuss further on this. It's not necessary that we have to respond right now, but I was wondering about this.
Yeah, sure. Maybe we can have a longer discussion sometime later, Purbaya, because I think
Yes.
everybody is hungry. Huh?
Yes, of course. And thank you so much, Dr. Gule and Priyambada ji also, Professor Priyambada Sarkar. She has actually, in a way, she has asked, and I was also thinking that Dr. Gole needed some more time, and in Provesh Gole. Thank you so much, Dr. Provesh Gole, and all the speakers, and just be little more patient for 5 more minutes, since my colleague, Professor Jyotsna Saha, will offer the final vote of thanks. Thank you, Dr. Gole, once again.
Am I audible, Purvayan? Yes.
Yes, very much. Yeah.
Jasnadi, just unmute microphone.
You have to unmute, Jasnadi. It is mute. Yes.
Thank you, Purvayan, for giving me the opportunity to offer vote of thanks on this auspicious occasion of today international webinar on determinacy and indeterminacy of meaning from Wittgenstein's perspectives. We know that Wittgenstein was the leading analytical philosophers of the 20th century. He is unique for having produced two equally influential opposed philosophies, a useful days. We are very much indebted to our esteemed speakers who have discussed the theme determinacy and indeterminacy of meaning from Wittgenstein's perspective, from their own understanding. On behalf of the Department of Philosophy, University of Gour, Banga, first of all, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Chanchal Choudhury, for his inspiration, support, and kind words. We get inspiration from him in every step of our academic journey. I would like to extend my sincere thanks and gratefulness to our esteemed speakers, Professor Priyambada Sarkar, who is from University of Calcutta, and Dr. Anirban Mukherjee from University of North Bengal, and Dr. Professor Jang Gole from IIT Bombay, now presently Mumbai, for their extremely brilliant presentations and the findings they shared with us. They have raised many issues which we might think about. I am very happy to extend my sincere thanks and deep gratitude to our renowned speakers of day one of this international webinar, Professor Daniel Moyle Sharrock, University of Hertfordshire, UK, Professor Indrani Sannal, former Professor Jadavpur University, and Dr. Enakshi Rai Mitro, University of Delhi, for their excellent deliberations and fantastic discussions. Hope all our research scholars and students of the Department of Philosophy will be benefited from their talk. I am cordially expressing my thanks to our coordinator, Department of Philosophy, Dr. Purbayan Jha, for his initiative, wholehearted support and enthusiasm. In spite of his active engagement with the postgraduate examinations of online mode, all the for this webinar. Once again, I would like to thank Purbayan. My sincere thanks to Professor Jhareshwar Ghosh, Program Coordinator, International Webinar on Determinacy and Indeterminacy of Meaning from Wittgenstein's perspectives, for his initiative, support, and valuable suggestions. I am happy to express my thanks to my beloved faculty members, Dr. Sukumar Chandra Rai, Dr. Purbayan Jha, Professor Jhareshwar Ghosh, Shampa Roy, and Dr. Sadek Ali, for their utmost cooperation and support, and which make this webinar a grand success. My sincere thanks to all our guest invitees from different universities and colleges for their participation. Thanks to all our research scholars and students who have participated in this webinar. Once again, thank you all for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaskar. Good night. Good night. Take care, all of you. Tata. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Anil.
Thank you.
Good night.
Yes. Opportunity. Really nice to see all of you.
We will communicate more on this.
Yes, yes.
By email and yes.
Yeah. We can also meet online sometime and discuss this.
Yes, actually, we will be thinking, considering to for an anthology project, if we find proper support and funding, we will communicate if we
Sure.
And stay well, Professor.
Yes. Taking care. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Take care too.
Yeah. Thank you, Tata. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Josnadi,
Good night.
thank you, Josnadi. Good night.
Good night.
Jhareshwar Das, Sadek, Sukumar Das, everyone, every student, sub,
Good night.
Good night.
ছাত্রছাত্রী স্কলার যারা এসেছেন বিভিন্ন কলেজ থেকে বাইরে থেকে সবাইকে থ্যাংক ইউ গুড নাইট